Focus on. We'll meditate on Mother Kali for a few moments, visualizing in the heart what her dhyana mantra describes. Om Karala Vadanam Ghoram Muktakeshim Chatur Bhujam Kalikam Dakshinam Divyam Mundamala Vibhushitam Sadyaschina Shira Kadaga Vamadhurdvakaram Bhujam Abhayam Varadam Chaiva Dakshinodvadapanikam. I pray to that terrifying, awe-inspiring goddess, the conqueror of death, she who faces south, she who is garlanded in a garland of human heads. She is Dakṣiṇa Kālī. In her upper left hand a sword, in her lower left hand a severed human's head. She assures fearlessness and gives boons with the mudras of her lotus-like right hand. Mahamegha prabham shyamam tatha chaiva digambarim Kantavasakta mundali galadhrudira charchitam Karnavatam satanita shavayugma bhayanakam Ghoradam stram karalasyam pinunatapayodharam. Her skin is the color of a dark, splendorous storm cloud. She is utterly naked, clad in only the 10 directions. Her neck and body are both stained red from the blood that drips from her garland. Her 2 fangs are fierce, but her 2 breasts are full and comely. Shavanam karasanghathai krita kanchim hasanmukim Srikka dvaya galadrakta dhara vispuritananam Ghorarava maharaudrim Smaśāna Kālī Balarka mandalakara lochana tritayanvitam. Her waist is girdled with a belt of human hands. Her 2 lips are stained red with blood as she smiles sweetly. She is intoxicated and joyful. Blood trickles down from the corners of her lips, framing her beautiful face. Danturam Dakṣiṇa Vyapi Mukta Lambika Chochayam Shavarupa Mahadeva Hridayopari Sangstitam. Her long flowing tresses fall down to her right side, flowing out to her right as she steps over to her left. Her 3rd eye resembles the mandala of the freshly risen sun. She is standing on the chest of her beloved Mahakala, Shavarupa Shiva, Sadashiva, in the form of a corpse. Shivabhish Ghorarāvabhish Chaturdikshu Samanvitam Mahakalena cha samam viparitaratāturam Sukha prasanavadanam smeranana saroram Evam sanchintayat kalim dharmakamartha siddhidam. All about her jackals are howling, filling the cremation ground with their shouts. She is that great terror who dwells in the cremation ground, who is ever eager for union with her Lord, Mahakala, in the reversed position. She is pleased and quick to answer prayers. One should contemplate the Divine Mother Kali in this way for the attainment of all that is good. Om Yathagnir Dahika Shakti Rama Krishne Sthita Hiya Sarva Vidya Swarupam Tam Saradam Pranamamyam. I bow to that goddess Sarada, the Shakti and power of the Absolute. She is the embodiment of all the Vidyas, Kali, Tara, Shodashi, Bhuvaneshwari, Bhairavi, Chinnamastaka, Dhumavati, Bagala, Matangi, Kamala, and others. Salutations to all the forms of Devi. And now a prayer to Kundalini Shakti, we'll talk about tonight. Om Naumi Devim Sharirastham Nrityato Bhairava Kritehe Pravrin Megha Ghanna Vyoma Vidyulekha Vilasinim. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Salutations to that goddess who is playful and beautiful and terrible, like a streak of lightning flashing across the monsoon season sky. She is that energy that abides in the body of Bhairava. Salutations to that embodied goddess, Kula Kundalini. Om, peace, peace, peace. Jai. So once again, thank you infinitely, fam, for your patience. Let me just get an asana under me, and then we'll get right into it. Okay, thank you. Yes, I was stuck on Mulholland Drive like in a David Lynch movie. And then as I'm inching and inching and inching closer, we're getting later and later. And so I'm deeply, deeply thankful that you were also patient and I'm so excited to talk with you tonight because we're gonna talk about something I think very important, very crucial, very relevant for many people, and that is regarding spiritual crises or Kundalini emergencies, as we sometimes call them. So we'll be very clear as to what Kundalini Shakti is. Of course, it's very mysterious, that term Kundalini, and it's used in many different contexts to mean many different things. And sometimes it gets associated with like a particular movement here in the 60s in America, and so there's a sense in which Kundalini means an organization or a movement. But in truth, the word Kundalini is used by so many different traditions, and they almost all of them have a different understanding about what it is. In some traditions, like in the one to which we belong, in our tradition, there's a sense in which Kundalini is twofold. There's an Urdhva Kundalini and Adho Kundalini, upper Kundalini and lower Kundalini. So even the idea of having two Kundalinis is an interesting one. Because in the medieval Tantric context, there's one Kundalini. So in the Hatha Yoga traditions, like in the Shiva Samhita or in the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, it's like there's this one serpent power, as Arthur Avalonji so beautifully called it, nestled in the Mooladhara Chakra at the base of the spine, and through the practices of Hatha Yoga, that is through physical postures, breathing techniques. Look at Tarama. This is Bhairavi and her dog. I'm just so inspired by this. Bhairavi's black dog is here. We invoke Kali. Now Bhairavi's dog is so happy, licking her face and whatnot. See, that, by the way, I should mention that Dhyana mantra, which we just chanted, it's so beautiful and so powerful because it's not just the poetry of the words. Obviously, that's a profound thing also. But the sounds themselves, that's the power of mantras in Sanskrit. The poetry is profound, beautiful. When you have the translations, what aesthetic rapture can be had just by contemplating the imagery of the dhyana mantra. But it's not just that, it's the sounds themselves that have meaning. And maybe a brief aside on this. In many traditions, the words are only important insofar as they're related to some meaning. So shabda, sound, and artha, meaning. There's a link between them, sambandha. So when I say table, the meaning of that sound is the image of often a four-legged thing upon which you put your coffee. That's the table. And insofar as I can use the word, you can understand what I'm thinking. And so the point of the word is just to put in your mind what's here in my mind, or to point something out in the world. So I could point over there and say, that's a table. Now, in this case, the word table is a means to an end. That is the perception of the physical table. So the word is not quite so important. It's the meaning that's important. However, in the Tantric worldview, especially in the Malini Vijayotaro Tantra and the non-dual Tantric traditions, words themselves are important, but not as important as the phonemes that make up those words. So words and their meaning, that's great, but even more primordially, even more importantly, is the phoneme. I, o, leaving out some of the semi-vowels here. The idea is that these carry power, and power beyond like the linguistic conceptual mind. So the power of the phonemes is not a conceptual power. It's something prior to the concepts of the mind. So these mantras, importantly, are used to evoke energies, evoke experiences in the mind by appealing to the power of phonemes that are non-conceptual. That is to say, there are bija mantras embedded into each and every one of these chants, these hymns. That's why sometimes when you hear it and you don't know the meaning, you still can get an effect from it. There's so many people in the world who just hear these mantras. Some of them at nightclubs, a DJ, like some kind of Psy trance or acid house DJ or something, will put on the Gayatri mantra or some hymn from the Rig Veda or something. And it's all in the context of some very upbeat or like lo-fi, like techno thing. And then suddenly something happens. They hear the hymn and the energy flows. Or they're just at a restaurant and then they hear someone chant aloud or something. Like randomly encountering these hymns can also have a profound effect upon the psyche, just because of the power of the sound itself. So when we chant the Kali Dhyana mantra, it's very powerful, very important, because even if we left it untranslated, it serves as an invocation. We're invoking Ma. And it's nice to feel just the shift in the room, the shift within as we sing this hymn, the Dhyana mantra, and as we contemplate the images that this hymn evokes within us. So Kali. So the phonemes are so powerful. Anyway, I just mentioned that because Tarama is with Bhairavi Devi. Bhairavi Devi is with Bhairava, the black dog. And so when you sing this hymn, it's like it transforms the world and suddenly all you see is Kali. The imagery of the hymn becomes the imagery of your immediate reality. The sun setting becomes like the glow of so many cremation ground fires. And the air almost seems to resonate, thrum with the howling of jackals. In Michigan, it was so beautiful. We're in the forest in Battle Creek, Michigan. And Viranatha will tell you, we sat down to do a homa late at night We had just done a nice puja. Yeah, I was just going to bring that up. And we sat down to do a homa, Ma Kali's homa, late at night. And just as we sat down, just as we lit the fire, I mean, I think maybe slightly before lighting the fire, as Viranatha will testify, suddenly the forest explodes with the shouts of jackals, coyotes, I think you call them here. So the whole vibration of the night, it's like in the middle of the forest, it's absolutely quiet. And the forest is pretty haunted too. A lot of presence there. And then suddenly you just hear all these jackals, the blood-curdling cry of jackals. There were so many of them. My first thought was like, is there a sorority nearby? Okay. But like there's like just suddenly the air is just filled with this sound. And it's a blood-curdling sound. The hair stands on end when you hear the sound of these jackals. Now just like look at the imagery here. When you think of Mother Kali, even if you don't actually translate the hymn, the imagery of the hymn comes in terms of an energetic sense. And it's pretty frightening, actually. It's pretty edgy to use that word in its broadest possible sense. Because the cremation ground is a scary place. It's a lonely place. It's a place where people go to cry. Sadhus go there to cry tears of joy because they encountered Bhairava, but most people go there to cry tears of grief because they lost their loved ones. And so it's a place it's cursed earth, you could say, because everyone goes there and feels bad. It's very tamasic because the energy of the cremation ground is the energy of people feeling grief. And not only that, there are funeral pyres constantly reminding us of death and decay and dissolution. It's a kind of lawless place beyond the pale of society, so it's outside reason, as I was arguing for a few lectures ago. It represents the subconscious mind, to use a Jungian or maybe Freudian term, that is beyond reason, if you will, or subliminal, beneath reason. So it's a place that doesn't conform to logic, to reason, to laws, to structure. It's a place that confronts our sense of preservation, our sense of institutions, because it's a place where things go to die and where we go to mourn that fact. And of course, it's a wild place because jackals and hogs and all sorts of animals roam about. And in the middle of the night, their cries that rend the air, oh my God, they evoke a sort of energy. And Kali lives there. She lives in this place. Kali and Shiva, Shiva in the form of Bhairava especially, they love cremation grounds. They haunt the cremation grounds where most people dare not tread. There, Kali and Bhairava make their home. So just contemplating like the energy of that, in the hymn, subliminally, without even having translated the hymn, and having translated the hymn, the energy of that translation, like, oh my God, here we are in this Smaśāna. And so we have to talk about some issues of safety and grounding and stability because like these motifs can be a little destabilizing for the mind, especially those who are just getting started in spiritual life. We're moving arguably beyond tamas, beyond rajas, into a realm of sattva, into a realm of lucidity, balance, purity. And this imagery seems to be anything but. It evokes a notion of impurity, at least in the Brahmanical sense of the cremation ground being impure, or funeral pyres being impure, or blood being impure. So we should approach all of this with some care, actually, because like I was saying last week, and maybe the week before that, if you're going to spend a lot of your time meditating on Kali, that naturally means putting yourself psychologically and energetically in Kali's domain, which is the Smaśāna. And that, as we said, is a wild place, beyond all reason, underneath all reason, above all reason. So we'll talk a little bit about that tonight, how to stay safe, how to stay grounded, and particularly because when we talk about Kali, we're talking about a kind of sadhana that is necessarily tantric in flavor. Without even talking about the post-classical Hatha Yoga movement, the classical tantric period features some really powerful sadhana, some explosive, literally in some cases, techniques that are very closely guarded because of their power, because of their force. And I'm perfectly convinced that as these practices become more and more widely available to people, there'll be more and more clinical attempts to understand the effects of these practices on the psyche. And I think more and more, even modern science will testify to the power of these practices, as they indeed already are, like in the case of color theory, how looking at the color red can affect you. I mean, just think about what it will do to you to just wear red all the time, or to wear black all the time, or to be in a setting in which everything is black or red. They put babies in cool blue rooms because the color blue is supposed to calm the baby down. And they say that red cars are much more likely to get into accidents. And there's even that myth about the bull, at the Spanish what do you call, matador setting, where if you wave a red cloth, I think it's a myth, I don't know, but if you wave the red cloth, the bull gets agitated or something. I think the bull is already agitated. But there's this idea, this link between red and hunger and desire and aggression and arousal, all that kind of stuff. And so the color red is so important for Kali. It's so important for Mars, for Mangal. The color black is so important for Kali and for Bhairava. It's the color of her skin. And more importantly, it's the color of the night sky. And the night is pretty terrifying for most of us. Again, the night is when reason goes to sleep and some other kind of thinking arises, a thinking that usually gets us into trouble. So the cremation ground, nighttime, the colors red and black. Oh my God, these are pretty destabilizing things. When you think of the gunas, sattva is typically depicted as white. So we'll find that spirituality and the color white often go together. When people want to be spiritual, often the spiritual garb that immediately comes to mind is to wear all white. And there's something to that, because it's sattvic, which it's nice. Oh Kaya, Jaima, Dharma Kaya Devi, Jaima, Jaima, Jaima. So good to see you, Mom. I miss so many of you so much. But anyway, the color white, that's an important color. And so that's why when people are starting spiritual, often white is such a beautiful thing to wear. It's supposed to reflect energies, it's supposed to evoke a sense of purity. And I was talking to a brahmachari, a novice monk in a monastery, and he was telling me he really likes wearing white because he always stains his clothes. And I said, in your case, it's not really white, G, it's more brown or yellow. I mean, I don't know what order you belong to, but here all the brahmacharis wear white, but you're in yellow. Are you doing Bagalamukhi sadhana? I used to tease him relentlessly for all the turmeric stains because he was the cook in that ashram. Anyway, as a cook in the ashram, he obviously got a lot. We were cooking Indian food, obviously a lot of turmeric and all manner of things. So his clothes were stained. I said to him, it must be really hard to keep your clothes unstained. And he said, I actually really like that because it keeps me very present. He said, because my clothes so easily stain, I take extra care not to stain them. He wasn't so successful. But at least it evoked a sense of presence for him. So that's why the color white, it has an effect on us, an effect on the psyche, what color we wear. So white is typically associated to sattva, which in the Sankhyan sense is the principle of lucidity, clarity, calmness, joy even, joy, the feeling of joy and a deep pervading sense of joy is associated to sattva. A very sattvic mind is a very joyful mind. And we say things like bird song and sunlight and nature. There's a lot of sattva here. Or like spaciously sitting and relaxing in an alert kind of way. It's an alert relaxation, if you will. Just being present. And I think many people who practice mindfulness or who practice some form of vipassana or something like that, they know what I'm talking about. There's this clarity, a sort of peace that arises when you are wholly present, but not stuck in any kind of conceptual thinking. When you've ended your investment in the flow of objective formal thought, and yet you're just as aware as you otherwise would be, there comes sattva. And how beautiful it is. It's an arising of joy and sweetness. So sattva is associated to joy. And of course, when we practice spirituality, we want to increase the quotient of sattva. We do practices like go out into retreats in nature. We sit and we meditate and disambiguate from the flow of conceptual thought. We wear fresh clothes, often white clothes, and we burn incense, and we do all of these things that can evoke a sense of sattva. And thank God for sattva. Sattva is the thing to cultivate when we start our spiritual journey. So just to use the language of Sankhya, sattva is the guna or the quality of what is commonly and popularly referred to as spirituality. Hmm? So when we say spirituality, and it doesn't matter what tradition we're speaking within, often when we say spirituality, what we have in mind when we use that word is the cultivation or the conscious cultivation of sattva, that quality of clarity, peace, lightness, and of course, ultimately, joy. Sattva is also related to knowledge. So that's why luminosity, clarity, that those are good translations for something like sattva. It's really hard to translate sattva because when you look at the word itself, it stands for like beingness. Sat means being or truth, and twa means something like ness. So sattva is like beingness or truthness. And what is it to be? Is to be joyful. Joy is inherent in consciousness. Now, in the beginning of our spiritual life, we are so occluded with all of our physical sensations and mental flow of conceptual thought, vikalpas we call them, that we don't really feel sattva except in brief spurts. We get glimpses of sattva every now and then when we can disambiguate from the body and mind. So it's very natural then, I think of spirituality as the disambiguating of the self from the body and mind, or the discerning between the body and mind. And that's the way that the yoga tradition conceives of spirituality. So the yoga tradition argues that there is this thing called prakriti, and it is the sum total of all experiences that you can have. But importantly, there is this reality called purusha, which you truly are, that is indeed separate from prakriti. But it's like if I were to hold a clear crystal and a red flower up and show them to you, say I had the crystal in front of the flower, the clear crystal would take on the qualities of the red flower. So the clear crystal would appear to be red. This is called adhyasa or superimposition, to use a term from the Vedanta. That means the clarity, purity, and joy of my being is occluded, as it were, by this red rose. I'm actually this clear crystal, pure luminosity. And then because I'm in proximity with a red crystal, I'm sorry, red rose, I become a ruby or something. And then arguably then I suffer because then I think I'm this body, then I think I'm this mind, then I feel my limitations. So the whole process of yoga, which has its roots in the Sankhya philosophy, is disambiguation. It's more about V-yoga than it is really yoga. It's about taking two things apart, taking Prakriti apart from Purusha. So many practices in spiritual life are designed to do just that, to turn down the volume knob on the body, to turn down the volume knob on the mind, so that something else can shine through. Now, Rajas is the energy of dynamism or aggression, even. You can just call it the active principle. Fire has a lot of Rajas. Fire burns and destroys. As much as fire can cook your meal, it can also wreck your shit, as many people discover all around the world every year. So fire is fierce. Lightning has Rajas. Very angry, very ambitious people have more Rajas than anything else. So the word Raja is not unrelated to the word Rajas. It's the power to act, to do. It's a dynamism. It's a kind of power. And in its exalted state, it's expressed as zeal, zeal for spiritual life. And of course, in its depraved state, it's the desire to destroy and to control and to insatiably reach out for fulfillment when none is felt within. Then, of course, there's tamas, which always gets a really bad rep because tamas means inertia, and necessarily it is the diametric opposite of sattva. If sattva is clarity, luminosity, peace, and joy, then tamas is heaviness, inertness, darkness, and depression. So we would say then that a person who's very depressive or a person who feels very heavy or very low energy has an abundance of tamas in their being. So tamas, the tamasic energy. So tamas, but if you make it into an adjectival from tamasic energy, is often scorned in spiritual life. We don't like it. We don't like it because it's a very embodied, heavy, undesirable kind of thing. It's grief. It's the energy of grief. But arguably, it's also the energy of maybe lust or energy of maybe anger or hatred. So here's where the lines blur a little bit between tamas and rajas, because we could say anger has a kind of fiery quality, so it has a somewhat more of like a rajasic quality. We could even say lust has a somewhat more of an aggressive and active quality, the desire to go out and find some kind of gratification, whether physical, psychological, or spiritual in the world. Like that energy of lust and anger seems to be more at home with our understanding of rajas, right? Except that many great masters, Sri Ramakrishna included, have labeled lust and anger as a kind of tamasic thing, which I think is very important because it shows you that rajas and tamas are like kind of the same thing almost. And that's why when you have a very rajasic experience, tamas follows shortly after. I'm thinking like when you take a drug and it's really exciting and there's all this rajas, you're full of energy and even joy because so many substances can evoke such a powerful sense of sattva. But then afterwards, there might be the sense of tamas where you like crash out or something like that. And so the reason why I think people avoid a lot of foods like onions or garlic or spicy food is because those foods are rajasic. And things that are rajasic can increase tamas within you. So if you eat meat, that might make you feel quite energetic and strong, but it can also make you feel really heavy because it takes a lot of energy to digest meat. And because we don't like tamas, we stay away from meat. Now, I don't stay away from meat, but I don't stay away from onions and garlic, and soon you'll see why. But there are people, of course, who in spiritual life will stay away from meat, onions, and garlic, and that's perfectly valid, perfectly legit, because this is one way to understand spirituality. Spirituality is the effort to cultivate more and more sattva. And that means turning the volume knob down on rajas and tamas. Now you guys, hold up. I'm not presenting a teaching really. I'm just sketching out a particular approach to spirituality, which I'm actually going to, if you don't mind, oppose a little bit in this talk. But partly to show you why Kali sadhana can be so harrowing and so dangerous for many people. In fact, Vijaya was just saying the other day, we were just joking. We were up to something kind of crazy. And then she was just like, one of these days, I just want to be in ISKCON and like wake up at 4 a.m. and be vegetarian and then just wear pure white clothes and like do Mahamantra for 16 rounds every day. You're like, we just like laughed about that idea, which is great. It's really beautiful. It's a really beautiful kind of thing. And it's really good for so many people, especially I would say, and this is not to be pejorative, for those of us just starting out spiritual life, it's really important that we articulate exactly what we mean by that word spiritual. What is spiritual about our practices? What is it that we're gravitating towards? And we would say it's this quality of sattva. But now let's go deeper. Sri Ramakrishna was I know. Krishna is the greatest of all time, and that's why we're not saying Gaudiya Vaishnavas. They can really they know how to throw down, you guys. In Bengal, oh my God, the Gaudiya Vaishnavas, they have as bad a rep, I think, as us Kaula Margins. Like they're also ecstatic, we could say, in the least. But if you picture like the most like purity oriented tradition, that has tremendous value, because it teaches us purity. It increases sattva. So if you eat at Govinda's, the restaurant at ISKCON, you'll feel light and happy. Obviously, because they don't use onion, they don't use garlic. It's very ghee oriented, and ghee is very nourishing, and ghee is supposed to be very sattvic. So the food is sattvic, the environment is sattvic. People go there to think sattvic thoughts. When they go there, they are very careful not to think lustful thoughts. In fact, they have very strict dress codes and things like that sometimes in some contexts. So you go there and you don't think any lustful thoughts. You try to stay calm and peaceful and happy. And that energy, which you're cultivating inwardly, is naturally going to permeate in the space. And so when you go into a temple like that, you feel uplifted. There's a beautiful sense of lightness in the food, in the people, in the clothes, in the ceremonies. So yeah, and that's the idea. It's like they are interested in creating sort of it's not conservatism for conservatism's sake. It's the effort to cultivate sattva, and I just want to like just clearly say that is awesome. It's really important. And I think until we have a strong foundation in sattva, a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about and the kinds of practices that I'm exploring with you can be quite dangerous for people for reasons that we're going to get into. And that's why this stuff is considered to be kind of, and it's guarded because it's considered to be kind of like higher adhikari type stuff, meaning one requires a lot, I'll put it in this way, one requires a lot of grounding in sattva before one can maybe profit from these kinds of practices. So for a long time, these practices were only given to practitioners later on in their journey. Like Kali is revealed after many, many, many years of thorough grounding in maybe, I don't know, dualistic, purity-oriented, Brahmanical Shaiva Siddhanta. That could have just been not just a historical fact, but I think a pedagogical fact too. It's like just good pedagogy to ground someone in notions of purity, regulation, structure before introducing these transgressive practices. Because what can you transgress if you don't have rules to transgress? What's the value of your transgression if you're just an alcoholic? So the line between a person doing Bhairava sadhana and alcoholic is a very thin one. And it's in those blurred lines that I mean to have this discussion with you. Because many of you who have met me or have been in this world will see that it's a blurry line, like of what
It
like
is.
absolute decadence looks like and what spirituality looks like. It can be confusing, especially if you're coming from that more sattva oriented perspective. Like I think of Vasishta. Remember, Vasishta wanted to do Tara sadhana, Tara Matara. So he went and he performed thousands of years of Tara sadhana, some ridiculous amount of time. But nothing was happening, and then one day he almost cursed her. He cursed Matara for not appearing, and then of course Matara appears. So there's a hint. If you want God to appear, curse her. It's a tamasic way of worshipping God, which Sri Ramakrishna actually endorsed. And I'll get into that in just a few moments. So Vasishta, filled with tamas. I mean, remember, he's a great sage and he's worshipping Tara for thousands of years, meditating on her from morning till night, from night till morning for thousands of years. So he's filled with sattva, but still nothing is happening. His sattva is not enough to generate Tara. He can't experience Tara. So he's about to curse her, right? Because sattva can easily become tamas. Those two also, the lines are quite blurred, as we'll get into in just a few moments. So he's about to curse her, and then she appears and she's like, wait, wait, wait. Before you curse me, there's something you have to know. What you're doing is great. It's just not the kind of sadhana I respond to. I'm to be worshipped in a different way. And if you want to learn this way, go to Tibet or go to China, she said. And there you will learn the Chinachara because there is an incarnation of Vishnu. And he will teach you how I like to be propitiated. So, of course, Vasishta goes, and the legend has it, when he gets to Tibet or he gets to China, he meets the Buddha, who is the incarnation of Vishnu that we were talking about. that Tara mentioned. So there's the Buddha, except much like in the Matsyendranath story, the Buddha is drunk out of his mind, and there are dutis, consorts on his lap, and it's an orgy. The whole thing is an orgy. And of course, this is like a dramatic example of being in the world. It doesn't have to be wine and orgies. It could just be working on Wall Street, or it could be the battlefield of Kurukshetra. To me, Krishna teaching Arjuna on the battlefield in Kurukshetra is as radical as Buddha teaching Vasishta in the middle of an orgy. This is what I want to make clear. It's not about sex, it's not about violence, it's about both. The world is sex and violence. The world is Mars and Saturn. The world is a cremation ground. And so, in the midst of all of that, whether it's the Bhagavad Gita or this Tarapita origin story, like you as a spiritual person might be shocked. And indeed, Vasishta was horrified. He was scandalized. He was like, the goddess herself told me to come here to learn her sadhana. And I was told that this is an incarnation of Vishnu, God himself. And yet, before me, I only see a drunk cavorting with dancing girls in this orgy. Like this is obviously not my spiritual teacher. Like how could this be a guru? How could this worldly degenerate have anything to offer me? And so Vasishta turns around and starts to walk away. So this is important. This is the pride of sattva. It creeps in as we practice spiritual disciplines, as we wear white clothes and as we observe our vegan and vegetarian diets. Slowly we start to feel like we're better than everyone. You know, when we meet someone who isn't vegetarian, we think, oh, they're on their journey. We condescend to them. We think we're somewhere further along in the evolution of spirit than them because they eat meat, you know. Or we think, oh, well, this person, they're not conscious or not mindful about X or about Y or about Z. So therefore, I'm more spiritual, etc., etc. So sattva does unfortunately carry with it a hint of pride, which can easily turn sattva into tamas. So tamas can also be pride. Rajas, tamas, again, these are very fluid categories. And you'll see why this exposition on the gunas is going to be so important in just a few moments. So what happens now is Vasishta turns around, he starts to storm out of the room. And there are two versions, a few different versions of this story. One version is, oh, and Yashodhara's comment here is really important. She says, I met the most violent, angry, sattvic people in my 3-year stay at Goa. And that's a really important point because sometimes when we put on the garb of sattva, it is a kind of spiritual bypassing, and these issues don't get resolved and they come out in even worse ways. That's why sometimes there's so much darkness in all this love and light, Guru Kula kind of environment, you know? Because outwardly there's so much presentation of sattva, and inwardly there's a kind of spiritual hypocrisy because we feel ourselves to be so sattvic and so much better than everyone else that we don't really deal with our bullshit, and then it comes out in all of these different ways. So, partly you could say hypocrisy is the only thing that Sri Ramakrishna had a problem with. You know, he just felt like what we say and what we do should match what we think. But the problem with putting on a spiritual garb, or the problem with representing spirituality as being just sattva, and again, that's a wonderful thing to do if we mean it. But the problem with that is often we have a lot of unresolved rajas and tamas, and we make a show of sattva. We wear sattvic clothes, we wear white clothes, and we use sattvic language, and we eat sattvic food, but inwardly there isn't that sense of sattva. Anyway, where was I? So Vasishta is turning away. Vasishta is very sattvic. I mean, he's one of the greatest sages of all time. So he's turning away from the Buddha, who is in the middle of an orgy, and he's walking out of the room. And there are a few versions of this story. The apologetic version of the story is at this moment everything disappears. Like all the dancing girls and all the wine, everything disappears, and it's just the Buddha, and he's just there by himself. And then Vasishta is like, "Wait, what happened?" And the whole thing was the Buddha's magic. It was all, oh, by the way, Jacob G, Ma, I'm so happy to see you guys. I'm coming to San Francisco soon. This time we'll go even harder. Like, I'm so ready. We started the tour in San Francisco, and then we've been going around all over. And Denver was really good, you guys. So we have to go hard. So I'm really excited for the next. And we're gonna do some really cool Kaula stuff. I'm very excited. Some good textual study. But I missed you guys.
Yeah, let's say bring the skulls then, right?
Yeah, bring the kapalas. And also, how was the Kumbh Mela? Last time I saw you guys was right before the Mela. I mean, it's good to see you guys. You guys, your first time in India was the Mela. I was like, whoa, that's starting at like level 500. How are you guys? You guys look so radiant.
Yeah, very good. I mean, there's like so much in our trip that it would take too long to explain on this class. But yeah, maybe when we meet up, we'll tell you all about it. It was action packed. We'll sit.
Oh my God, maybe in the Q&A we could talk. And Pandit Mohindra Deva also just did a Kailash Yatra. We didn't get a chance to hear the full story last time. So I don't know if you guys are down. Maybe in the Q&A we could have a little Yatra breakdown time.
Yeah, that would be
Very
great.
cool. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
We can all
Just-
vicariously go to the Mela with these two. This Biden. Good. So yeah, I'm excited. I'm so excited for San Francisco. Please come, everybody. It's like November something. I don't know the exact dates now because it's too far away to like understand. But in November, somewhere, I think in early, I don't want to say early November, somewhere, sometime in November, we're all going to be in San Francisco at Sumeru's house. And I love Sumeru's house because, I mean, the last time I saw you guys, we did a Prana Pratishtha for Ma Guheshwari, beautiful Ma from Bengal, sculpted beautifully, wonderfully sized murti, and she's really present in that house. So much Shakti flowing, and they do so much kirtan there. Sumeruji and Chaitanya Devi, they host so much kirtan, and they're just such good community builders that like that space, my God, the Shakti of that space, it's curated every day. They cultivate that Shakti, and not only that, it's on a farm. And there are animals, and it's just so spacious in Lafayette. So it's not like in the San Francisco. It's like in the Mission. It's outside of San Francisco. So, okay, that's happening. So if anybody wants to come, there's a Bay Area retreat. Of course, all our retreats are just open to the public. They're totally free, always donation based. Just drop in, drop out as you like. And there's floor spaces to crash on, but I'm sure like we can find accommodation also. I mean, we can't. They, I don't want to speak on behalf of Sumeru or Chaitanya. I don't know how many people they can host. But also Anisha Devi was so sweet. She lives there also in Lafayette. She also offered some rooms. So if anybody needs places to stay, space permitting, let us know, and we'd love to have you in San Francisco. But yeah, it's good to see you guys. Jaima. So anyway, but according to one version of the story, everything disappears and the whole thing is Maya. It's a magic show. But in another version of the story, it's not the dancing girls and the wine that disappears, it's the judgment that disappears. And Vasishta is able to see this Buddha for what he truly is, a Buddha. He is so free that he is free even in the midst of what many would call the most worldly of set and settings. But also importantly, this is someone who doesn't really mind being judged or doesn't really mind being seen as like worldly. Because so many of us, we do our things in the dark. Outwardly we present as one way on the internet or something, and then when the doors close, that's when all the rajas and tamas come out. But for these bhairavas, whether it's Kuroda Bhairava, Chanda Bhairava, Mohanmata Bhairava, they're just all of those things out in the open. They're an angry holy person, like Durvasas, or like they're like a drunk holy person. But they're a holy person because that holiness is not found in the body, nor is it found in the mind, nor is it found in the set and setting which surrounds that particular body-mind complex. It's something deeper, and they're established there. So when Vasishta was able to see this, then he was able to apprentice himself to this Mahonmata Buddha, this supremely intoxicated Buddha, and from him he learned the Kaula Marga. So in some context, the Kaula Marga is understood to be a Chinachara sort of thing. It's from Tibet, and it's imported into India. In another sense, we say, oh, it's from India, it was imported to Tibet by Padma Sambhava. And there's all this like kind of conflict around like who started the Kaula Marga. It doesn't matter. Tantra is Tantra. And the important thing is that in this story, there's a very sattvic Brahmin who encounters. I mean, this is also an important part of the story because the fact that he has to leave India is a big deal. For a Brahmin, he can't cross a river, he can't cross an ocean. And if he goes and meets this Tibetan Buddha, that's already so transgressive because here's a mlecha. Someone outside of Vedic society is going to be my guru. My guru can only be a Brahmana. I myself am a Brahmana. I can only be taught by a Brahmana. I can't even be taught by a Kshatriya of my own tradition what to say going into Tibet and learning from some mlecha, some barbarian in the mountains. Like, that's transgressive. And what I mean, I'm sure Vasishta wasn't surprised to find said mlecha doing mlecha type things that are, to his mind, the most impure, most worldly, most degenerate sort of things. But anyway, to his credit, Vasishta, because he's so spiritually illumined, was able to quote unquote see past all that, if I may use that language, and learn the Kaula Marga, which is a path involving the conscious use of transgression or the conscious use of rajas and tamas in order to make spiritual progress. So having learned then from this Buddha, this secret, he then went to Tarapit. And at that time, arguably it wasn't yet Tarapit, but he went there in Bengal, in the Birbhum district in northeast India, and he practiced, and this time very quickly he was able to get a result. Very quickly, Ma Tara appeared, and this is so beautiful. She appeared in the form of Parvati nursing Lord Shiva, because there's that beautiful story of Lord Shiva drinking the poison. And this is a very important story, and I think I should digress and tell you it. Of course, everybody knows it, but it's important to understand the Kaula Marga too. So Shiva drinks all the poison that would otherwise infect and kill the world. This is a very important motif in the Puranic depiction of Shiva. So there's this mountain, Mount Meru, and then there's a snake, Vasuki, and the gods are on one side and the Asuras are on the other, and they're all churning the ocean with Vasuki and with Mount Meru in order to get some stuff. They're trying to get this Amrita. We don't need to get into that. In this Samutara Manthan kind of story is so important. It's so archetypical in so many ways. It even references a Zoroastrian concept of good versus evil and then points to something that transcends both good and evil. Anyway, Shiva's not interested in this whole Samutara Mantran kind of thing. He's just sitting by himself, meditating. But something happens. The snake rips open as a result of the force of the tug of war, and all the poison pours into this ocean of milk. And of course, this is the Bhava Sagara, it's the ocean of the world. And so now in the world there is poison because of the wrestling or because of the friction of the two. Devas and Asuras, the good guys and the bad side, the Jedi and the Sith or whatever, because of this polarity and because of the tension set up, the electric circuit set up between these two poles, there is now in the world pollution. I don't read Farsi or Avestani, but I came across a text, a Zoroastrian text, and somebody translated it for me who did know Avestan. And the line that they read for me was so beautiful. The line said, "And Aingra Manyu, the noxious spirit, filled this universe with such pollution that not even the tip of the needle is free of his noxious influence." Just the way that it was described, the all pervasion of like evil, if you will. Poison. There's something about this world that is inherently poisonous. And in the Buddhist sense, we can say there are the three poisons. Or in the Bhagavad Gita, you hear the three gates of hell. There's language that says there's something about being in the body or about being in the world that is inherently problematic for your health, happiness, and well-being. And we just call it samsara, the poison of impermanence or something like that, which of course is experienced psychologically as anger, as greed, as lust, all of those things that destroy society and that destroy our own personal lives. Anyway, there's this poison, right? So Lord Shiva is the only one who's able to do anything about it. And this is important because we are Shaivas, like our tradition, the tradition that we're talking about now is Shaivism. And it's so important to me that you understand that this is a tradition unto itself with a flavor of its own that is something unique. And that's why when we think of Hinduism, we just use that word as a blanket term to include all the traditions of the Indic subcontinent. We get a bit confused because we enter into a Vaishnava space and then we enter into a Shaiva space and we find that like there's some competing ideals and concepts here. And it's important. Everything is great, everything is valid, but each thing must be understood in its own light. So thinking of Shiva, the archetypical Shaiva, right? Shiva is a Shaiva too. And in one of Kali's names in the Sahasranama, Kali is a Shaiva. Kali is a practitioner of the Shaiva Marga, naturally, because those of you who took Kali mantras, you're Shaivas, and you're also Kali, so Kali is a Shaiva. And even Shiva, there are stories of Shiva getting initiated by Shaivas. It's very interesting. Can you imagine initiating into your lineage the god that your lineage worships? There are all these beautiful stories. But Shiva as the primordial Shaiva, or Shiva as the prototypical Shaiva, is the only one, arguably, that the gods think to ask for help. Because he's the only one who knows how to work with poisons. If anybody else were to drink that poison, they would probably die. So Shiva is approached by all the gods and goddesses, and they're all like, "Please help us, Obi-Wan, you're our only hope." So what Shiva ends up doing is drinking all this poison, and it's so beautiful because there's an image of him holding this kapala. I think it's so beautiful. A bowl. In some pictures it's a coconut bowl, but really it's a kapala. It's a skull bowl, which is the sacred symbol of the Bhairava or the Bhairavi, the practitioner of the Kaula Marga, the Kapalika saint. Their emblem, if you will, is the kapala. And rarely do they go anywhere without it. Because like you would carry a trident or something or a staff in the Shankaracharya Dashnami, the danda is very important. The stick, the walking stick, it's a symbol of one's authority and one's lineage and all that. So the kapala is a symbol of one's tradition as well. Now, Shiva takes the kapala filled with poison. This is a really important point because often what do we fill our kapalas with? Liquor. Kapalas are typically filled with some kind of liquor, depending on the sadhana that you're doing. It might be rum, or it might, there's shastric specifications of what kind of liquors are suitable for what kinds of sadhana. So draksha or red wine is suitable for X type of sadhana, and that's because it is a sahaja type liquor that is fermented in this natural way. And then there's another kind of liquor which is only fermented when you add something new, and then that puts it in a different category of liquor. So whether it's pishti or shaudra, like that matters actually. There's a whole science to what kind of spirit is being invoked. But that spirit is typically put in the Kapala. So here the poison and the liquor that the Bhairava usually carries around is linked, you know? Yeah, exactly. So here's this poison, and Lord Shiva drinks it. He drinks the poison of the universe, you know? It's a remarkable thing. And according to the Puranic version of the story, as it's told across several Puranas, he's able to alchemize it. There's the Vishuddha Chakra, which is awakened knowledge or awakened spirituality, and that poison turns into nectar. The reason this is so profound for me is because I had just done a wedding. Asha Devi and Brennan Deva just got married, and we were reading the Kaula vows. So we had done the Vedic ceremony in light of the whole family on a particular day, but the night before we did the Kaula wedding. And in the Kaula wedding, there are Kaula vows. And they're different from the Vedic vows. And one of the vows is I vow to turn poison into nectar with you. That's one of the things that a married couple does in the Kaula Marga. They vow to turn poison into nectar together. What a beautiful and thrilling vow, right? Those of you who are in love, I can already see the thrill, the bliss of that's what the sacred union of Bhairava and Bhairavi is all about. You wander the world absolutely free, skull bowl in hand, transmuting wine into water? No, transmuting poison into nectar. And you know, another moment in the Kaula ceremony that I really love, first of all, it's very female oriented, whereas, of course, in the Vedic ceremony, it's like, oh, well, the father will hand over the bride to the male side of the family and is like, here, I now give you this bride endowed with all auspicious qualities. Have this woman who is now endowed with truth as part of your family. So it's like there's like a handing off of the bride, and then there's a moment when the bride has to make an offering, like a pitri tarpana, so that all her psychological obstacles will be cleared and that a husband will have a very long life. So the prayer is, may my husband live for 100 years and be filled with strength. But her elder brother needs to help her make the offering. So that's beautiful. That's also beautiful, but it's in like a different paradigm, a more patriarchal Vedic paradigm, which is fine, by the way, not to knock it. Whereas in the Kaula paradigm, and Sri Ramakrishna actually references this in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. The husband, the bridegroom, sits like an idiot, and the bride does everything. And she's the kind of the one that takes the lead in the ceremony, if you will. So anyway, there's one very beautiful moment in the ceremony where you're like tied with a red string dipped in either blood or wine. And when that string is cut, which is really beautiful, there's like a cutting of the string. It indicates that you're actually both free, that no institution of marriage could ever hold you because you're free of all institutions, including the institution of your marriage. That what holds you together is not any piece of paper or any Vedic sacrifice. That as much as you are bound, you're also free. There's that moment, you know, a thrilling moment of recognizing that you're absolutely free. But then you make these vows of like as Bhairava and as Bhairavi roaming the world as two totally free people who are sharing their freedom together, we will transmute poison into nectar. I was like, wow, that is just such a essential way of describing the Marga and describing Shiva. He's the one who turns poison into nectar. So this is the like, this is the story and the motif of the story. Now, in this Tarapit variation, which I really love, what Vasishta sees is so beautiful. He performs the sadhana for Matara, of course, using liquors and various other things. And when he succeeds in the sadhana, the vision that he gets of Matara, allegedly, and there are many different ways to tell this story. I heard a great Baal tell it to me in a different way. But in one version, she appears as Parvati, and what he sees is Lord Shiva passing out after the consuming of the halhala. Like he even actually Shiva can't handle it. It's really interesting. This is a Shakta take on the story. By the way, there are texts like the Mahabhagavata Purana that like take up old Shaiva stories, like Sati wanting to go to see her father's yagya and all that, and then add like very Shakta elements to it. So the origin story of the Dasha Mahavidyas, you know, appearing out of Sati. Those some of you know that story. That's from the Mahabhagavata Purana, which is a later Purana. And just notice the name, Mahabhagavata Purana. It's like, oh, you thought your Bhagavata was good? Check this out, you guys. It's the Mahabhagavata Purana. So the Puranas can sometimes have a sectarian flavor, but I just want to put all that aside for a moment. You can, of course, read this in a sectarian way by arguing for the supremacy of Shakti over Shiva, but such things are nonsensical. That's like arguing for the supremacy of heat over fire. It's the same thing. Anyway, in this story, though, Shiva does pass out. He's not able to handle the liquor, and in fact, none of us can. No one can succeed at the Kaula Marga by their own merit, actually. It's in one Kaula text, it's described that it would be easier to wrestle tigers and to dance on the edge of a sword than it is to walk the Kaula Marga successfully. As Swami Bhajananandaji actually says beautifully, the potential for self-deception is almost infinite. And that's a really good way of putting it. It's like the potential of cheating yourself out of genuine spirituality, or like just like getting into trouble with it, is potentially infinite. It's a dangerous path, obviously, for sincere spiritual aspirants. And so naturally then, it's described as not only walking the razor's edge, as per the Katha Upanishad, it's even more extreme than that. Walking the razor's edge, which is already so edgy, haha, pardon the pun. And it's also the title of a really great book by Somerset Maugham, who actually met Ramana Maharshi, interestingly. And that was the inspiration, I think, behind the book, Razor's Edge. I recommend it. It's a beautiful book. Anyway, the Katha Upanishad makes that claim that spiritual life is so difficult. It's a path of self-deception and many risks, and it's a bit like walking the razor's edge. But imagine how much harder the Kaula Marga is, because that's doing spiritual life, but like going straight to the Mela on your first adventure to India kind of thing, you know? So you guys are gonna be perfect. They are Kaula Margins, but I'm just like saying it's like perfect for that bhava, just the Veera bhava of like, yeah, like this is difficult, but so what? I can do it. But can we though? Because to do it requires the skill of a sword dancer, the skill of a lion wrestler or tiger wrestler. And I love how that verse combines both of them, because even if we know how to dance on swords, we might not know how to wrestle lions. And even if we know how to wrestle lions, we might not know how to dance on swords. So the Kaula Marga is like doing both of those things at the same time. TLDR, it's hard as fuck, fam, right? Like that's what the claim is. But notice what this Tarapeet story adds to all this. Something so profound and so poignant. So Lord Shiva fails. He drinks the poison and he swoons and he's about to die. Now, sometimes Sri Ramakrishna references this too, but in this story, Mother nurses him back. In some versions, she catches his neck and chokes him. Kinky, I know. To prevent the poison from going into his system. So she's got him, as it were, to prevent the poison from polluting him. But this version is even better, I think, for me at least. He passes out and then she breastfeeds him. In other words, he becomes like a child in his powerlessness. Lord Shiva, God himself, has taken on something that he cannot handle, namely becoming a jiva. He's ensnared by his own maya. And so Mother comes and suckles him at her teat. Remember, this is her husband. But at this point, he has become Batuka Bhairava, a child. So you can think of like Shiva becoming Jiva as this act of husband becoming child. So now Batuka Bhairava starts to suckle at Ma Tara's or Parvati Ma's breast, and he's rejuvenated, resuscitated. He's brought back to consciousness, to recognition of his true essential nature as all-pervasive non-dual consciousness because of this mother's milk. So naturally, my favorite Red Hot Chili Peppers record is Mother's Milk. No, it's not. It's actually Stadium Arcadium. But I just love that record title, Mother's Milk. You know, it's great because Mother's Milk is everything. It's what brought Bhairava back. It was what brought Shiva back from his state of torpor. I know. Beat you to it. Haha. Soon you're gonna get so good at my rock and roll references that they're not even gonna be fun or funny anymore. That's my whole thing, you guys. Like, anyway, I have nothing to offer but pop culture references. And even that somewhat failingly. So anyway, this is so important that when Vashishta has a vision of Ma Tara, it is as a mother nursing, suckling her child. And so ultimately, the acme of Vasishta's devotion is to become mother's child. So you could say like the whole Leela is Lord Shiva wanting to experience what it's like to be mother's child, to be mothered. And so the claim here is that if you think you can do the Kaula Marga on your own, good God, that's going to be, I mean, maybe some people might be able to, but as one sadhu said to me, it's a bit like roller skating on ice. I was talking to him about this stuff and he said, you know what you're doing? You're roller skating on ice. Be careful. That's what he told me a long time ago. And I really took that to heart. I was like, oh my God, he's right. It's so risky. There's so many risks involved. But you know when it's safe to roller skate on ice? There's only one case in which it would be totally safe to roller skate on ice. It's when you're holding mother's hand. Do you know, like if she's got you, if you are totally surrendered to her, then you could be a leaf in her hurricane in outer space. That's how it feels like sometimes in life. You know, it feels like I'm a leaf in a hurricane, mother's hurricane in outer space. Who knows what's going on and when it's going on? And in case you think that I'm talking out of my own ass, just those of you who just recently we all had some time together, doesn't it feel that way? Like we just don't know what time it is. And it's always just like that. It's like being a leaf, right? Don't you feel that in a hurricane in outer space? Like what the fuck? I was so excited by that phrase because I feel like nothing described the experience of devotion to mom more than that. It's like we're holding on to her waist and she's dancing this crazy dance, and all the while we're like, ah, because we're not yet convinced that the ride is safe. You know, we don't know that there's, you know, sometimes when you're getting on like Magic Mountain or something, like they put the thing on you like, it like goes on you, but then it's kind of like there's space between you and the thing, and there has to be so you can, but then it doesn't feel safe. You're like, especially for me, because I'm like a really small guy. I'm like, I'm gonna slip out of this thing. There's gonna be a news article tomorrow. This was made for Americans. This whole ride was made based on the like. This is what goes through my mind before I get on a roller coaster. I'm like, this ride was for Americans. It's not for small, skinny Indian boys like me. And even then, I'm especially small. So like, you guys, your measurements are not gonna work. Your foolproof safety system will only work for America. I'm gonna die. I'm gonna slip out of this thing, and tomorrow is gonna be a headline. So peace out. And you're right, like I think we all feel that when the thing comes and clicks in, you're like, this is not safe. And similarly, we're holding on to mother's waist and we're having this ride of a lifetime, but we're not yet convinced that it's safe, maybe. But devotion, or like the conviction in mother's presence, is the conviction of safety. You know you're safe because mother has you. And even if you quote unquote fall, where can you fall but in her lap? That feeling, this is the acme of Vasishta's devotion that eventually he realized, yeah, pretty short. Eventually he realized, actually, whenever I meet people from the internet, it's always so funny because you can only see like this height, right? But then when we meet, I'm like, oh, hi. You Westerners had superior milk growing up, okay? Can I say? Anyway, the smallest chilies are the spiciest. So this idea that if you feel safe in mother's devotion, there is the ultimate safety. And sometimes when we come to Kali, when we express bhakti to Mother Kali, we don't know what kind of path she's going to take us down. We don't know what kind of marga she's going to choose for us. Some of us want to practice Vamachara, but we're not cut out for it. And Mother knows that. So if we're devoted to Mother, then the first and foremost thing is that we'll trust what kind of marga she puts us in. So if we trust in mom, then what guru comes, what mantra comes, that's okay. That's ma teaching me in that way. And then when some of us would rather practice a much more sattvic sort of lifestyle, suddenly ma comes and says, no, I have another way for you. And then she grabs you by the hand and takes you this way. And then you're like, what? And then if you trust in ma, you'll also trust in her gurus, in her path, in the craziness of it all. But the first and foremost thing is trusting in ma. But you can't trust in ma, arguably. You can't have that conviction of safety until, to some extent, you have darshan of ma. Some extent you feel her presence. So my feeling is that sometimes Kaula Marga Vamachara, it's like a means to an end, and that end is to realize ma. But also sometimes I feel it's like what you do after you realize ma, almost, in order to interact with ma. But in any case, Vasishta learns this sadhana, which works with rajas and tamas, and he himself, being established in sattva maybe, is able to profit from it. But notice his first reaction to it was, this is not spirituality. So coming back now to Sankhya and to yoga and to the gunas, we have these three gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas. And we have the Sankhya notion that there is the Purusha, the spirit, which is quite independent of the flesh, of matter. And the goal now is to recognize yourself as spirit and not to get mixed up with the body and the mind, like a clear crystal appearing to be red. Separate the crystal, separate the rose, and see for yourself that the crystal was never red. So yoga, you could argue, develops Sankhya philosophy. I don't mind saying it that way. Obviously, yoga is a different philosophy. Using the word developed might not be really that respectful, but basically, I'll say it this way, that yoga adds some things to the Sankhya philosophy. And most of all, beyond just theoretical stuff, it adds practice. It adds a very meaningful sadhana, which more or less is maintained in the tantric world, mind you. We might have we add stuff like sattarka, reasoning is one of the limbs of yoga, but the rest of the stuff like asana and pranayama, the dharana, dhyana, samadhi, look, we like in the tantric world we just import that from Patanjali. But in any case, what Patanjali, what the yoga tradition offers us uniquely is samadhi, which is a description of a state that one attains in deep meditation, where, to use the metaphor, the rose and the crystal are separated. Yes? Let's be very clear about this. I know I talk about a lot of stuff, right? But sometimes I'm worried that when we talk about a lot of stuff, we forget the basics and the foundational ideas. And we have to really be grounded in Sankhya and in yoga in terms of just philosophy, what to say of practice, before we can appreciate the nuances of Tantra, before we can appreciate the nuances of Kaula Marga. So we have to talk about Sankhya, yoga, and its idea of spirituality. So now, once I have samadhi, I will recognize, and only in samadhi is this really possible, I will recognize that I am not the rose, I am the crystal. Because in samadhi, the crystal is separated from the rose. And you're free. At that moment, you're free. Now the question is, what next? So in the yogic sense, and you can see this from even medieval Advaita Vedanta texts, which are sometimes heavily influenced by yoga, like the Jivan Mukti Viveka, the goal is to stay there, stay in samadhi. So in Jivan Mukti Viveka, the greatest knower of Brahman, Brahma Vid Varishta, as opposed to the Brahma Vid Varayan, as opposed to the Brahma Vid, the basic knower of Brahman, the greatest Brahman knower, Brahma Vid, the greatest realized person is one who never comes out of samadhi. That's the claim made by texts like the Jivan Mukti Viveka. So who is free? Arguably, the only person who is truly ever free, according to this school of thought, is a person who is permanently established in samadhi. We call this samadhi nishta, one who is established forevermore in samadhi. But do you really want that? Some people might. But notice there's something about this, and I often argue this in other places too, that smacks of suicide, right? Swami Vivekananda called it dry suicidal advice. Because it's like a nihilistic goal. Like I want to not be. But of course, the counter to this is that no, you don't understand. It is the death only of the mind, of the ego. It's the death only of the body. It is to be everything, everywhere, all at once. Except that's not what it feels like in experience. In experience, it feels like wholeness without the manifold. So, if anything, this is an experience of unity without the manifold. Sankhya is not a non-dual system, Advaita Vedanta is, but yoga is used both in a Sankhyan context and in a non-dual classic context. So, in the classical non-dual idea, and these are subtle ideas, so bear with me, samadhi is the experience of oneness actually, because it is the negation of the world. So, when you attain samadhi, the world is negated. In other words, it's sublated. Baddha is the word that we might use in Sanskrit. It's gone. It's actually dissolved. It's like waking up from a dream, Classical Advaita would say. The dream was real only insofar as I was dreaming it. I was a person in the dream only until I woke up. So therefore, samadhi is like when you wake up from a dream. Now, when you wake up from a dream, notice this, is the dream at all important to you? Do you even care to remember it? Most of us forget our dreams. And more importantly, even if you won the lottery in your dream, it's very unlikely that you will wake up and jump for joy because you can't cash out on that money that you won in your dream. And some of us, we feel so relieved because things are happening in our dreams. Then we wake up and we're like, it was only a dream. Thank God, right? But like notice, the ability to dismiss the reality of the dream is only possible upon waking. Yes? Only when I wake up does the dream become a dream. Think of samadhi in that exact same way. Do you know, like if I wake up from this dream called the waking world, I'll say it's only a dream. Who cares? So from the Advaita Vedanta point of view, focus on this, this is a very important idea. From the Advaitic point of view, from classical Advaita, samadhi is like waking up from a dream because it is the negation of the world, and the goal is to stay in that state of perennial oneness without at all any experience of the manifold. In fact, I think it's quite telling if you use the word pragya to describe this state. So, and again, just stay with me for a few moments here. Try to think entirely in terms of this tradition. So we're not using any concepts like lucid dreaming or anything like that. We'll get into that. But just use dreams now as just a pure metaphor. And I think Rallyji's metaphor of lucid dream is really important because that's kind of what we're going for. But like if we go for this pure idea of Advaita Vedanta, it's quite simple. The world is a dream. It's not ultimately real. And that's why it's not satisfying. It's not real because it's impermanent, and it's not satisfying because it's impermanent. And samadhi is when you realize that the world is not. But it's not that you are not. You are. And what are you? Brahman. That's the word that they will use to describe it. And as Brahman, you are without action, you are without desire, and most importantly, you guys, most importantly, you are without the manifold. It is an experience of oneness without the manifold. Sankhya won't go so far. You know, Sankhya is not going to say Prakriti is unreal the way that Advaita Vedanta is going to do that. And Vijnanavada Buddhism will say also the world is ultimately empty. But Sankhya is willing to posit the realness of the world except as an other. So the world exists, it's real, but it's an other to me. It's anya, right? It's the other. I am Purusha. So in Samadhi, to use the Sankhyan language, I recognize that. That's it. Samadhi doesn't mean the deletion of the world. It means the recognition of Purusha. But guess what? In Samadhi, there's no experience of Prakriti. And you could argue that Advaita Vedanta is basing its philosophy more on the mystical experience of Samadhi than anything else. And I, I would argue the best thing about Indian philosophy is that all of these claims that philosophers make are based on their own mystical experience. These are all philosopher saints They're all poet mystic teachers, you know. So they can only describe the ultimate nature of reality based on what they've tasted of it. And many people have tasted samadhi and felt that to be the absolute. And therefore, they've called the world fake and illusion, impermanent, etc. And they've described the ultimate nature of reality as being a total oneness. So use the word pragya now. That's profound to think about. The word pragya in the Mandukya Upanishad has the connotation of undifferentiated consciousness. A commentator provides this image, a very telling image. Imagine there's a field full of cows, actually almost like the house we'll be in San Francisco. Sumeru's house has all these animals out in the field. So imagine there's a field and there's Krishna and Balarama, the sheep, the ram, I guess. And there's all the horses. One of the horses' name is Dumavati, I think. Anyway, they've named all their animals very cute. Anyway, so imagine all the horses and the cows and the sheep and whatnot. Now imagine all of this on a cloudy new moon night. You're looking at the same field. All the animals are still there. I think the cows are sleeping standing up, right? So they're all still there, but you can't see them. You can't tell them apart. You can't distinguish one cow from another. They're all still there though, but they're held in the undifferentiated mass of darkness. Lest I scare you, samadhi is a bit like that, right? It's the undifferentiated mass of darkness. But don't worry, there's a clear light, obviously, that shines in the midst of that void, and that's you. Your presence is clearly felt, obviously not in the way that it's felt now, because Advaita Vedanta would say this is but a shadow of your true self. But there, in that blackness, there is no world and no sense of this is different from that. It is an undifferentiated mass of consciousness. This is called pragya. This is from the Advaita Vedanta point of view. Now, in the Sankhyan point of view, no prakriti exists, it just exists for others. Isn't that beautiful? A lot of Advaita Vedanta is actually influenced by Buddhist idealism. Yogacara, we call it sometimes. But when I call it Yogacara, the Buddhists get upset because they're like, that's not really a school. I don't know. I'm talking about like Vasubandhu, right? Whatever the fuck you guys want to call Vasubandhu school. If you want to call it Vijnanavada, sure. But I'm talking about Vasubandhu. I'm talking about the Sanskritic tradition of Indic idealism that was mostly Buddhist in flavor. So that Buddhism, which is idealism, was very much in dialogue with Advaita Vedanta. So Advaita Vedanta is also incredibly idealistic. And as idealist, they can also lean towards Ekajivavada, solipsism, which is again a perfectly valid school in Indian philosophy. In the West, solipsism gets a bad rep only because no one's able to refute it, so they're scared of it and they poo-poo it. But like no, in India, we're boldly willing to accept. And by India, of course, I mean Tibet, Pakistan, Bangladesh, you know, like in the Indic subcontinent. We're perfectly willing to accept solipsism as a valid philosophical position. And not just that, obviously, idealism in all of its forms, including its most extreme solipsistic forms, which you will find represented in Gaudapada's commentary on the Mandukya Upanishad. So there's solipsism, the idea that I alone exist and the entire world is arising only in my mind, and other people are also arising only in my mind. If you think this philosophy is wrong, prove it because it doesn't seem to have any real falsification, and maybe that's the problem. And I like the way Sartre tried to disprove solipsism. He's like, obviously there are other people because otherwise why would I feel shame? It's a cute way of saying it. Anyway, putting being and nothingness aside for a moment, let's come back to the issue at hand. There are solipsists like the Yogacarins or like the Vijnanavadins or like some Advaita Vedantins, but the Prakriti Purusha model from Sankhya is not a solipsistic one. The Sankhyans do admit a plurality of souls. So they say we are each and every one of us individually jivas, right? We're all jivas. And as jivas, we all of us experience together this Prakriti. There are very few pure Sankhyans left because Sankhya, of course, is adopted by many other traditions, including Shaivism. But I met one pure Sankhyan actually. He was a practicing yogi, and he said something so beautiful to me. I was asking him, like, what's your view on jivas? And what's your view on Prakriti? Like, are we all experiencing the same Prakriti, or do we each carry with us a unique Prakriti? Because at that time, I was much more idealistic. I was much more in the Advaita Vedanta sort of world. And so I couldn't understand why he was asserting the presence of other souls, when in fact, I can't even assert the existence of anything outside of my own experience. So we're having this discussion. And he said to me, Baba, in that way that only Himalayan sadhus can, you know, they're not interested in terse philosophical discussion. They're living in a mystical realm of poetry. He silenced me immediately. He said, Baba, look at the sky. You see all these stars? These stars are all the Purushas, and they're all experiencing the same Prakriti, which is the night sky itself. And I love that view because Prakriti now becomes the container almost, as it were, for all these discrete points of awareness. And so we are all of us having an intersubjective experience. We're all experiencing the same prakriti, but from our own vantage points, no doubt. Then when we attain samadhi, this is so important, it's like that star blinks out. I'm going to extend the metaphor a bit. So imagine you're looking at the night sky and there are all these different stars. And just for fun, just imagine you're one of those stars and you're experiencing this prakriti. And then comes samadhi as a result of your yogic meditation and you blink out of existence like a star imploding. You stop experiencing prakriti. But just because you stop experiencing prakriti doesn't mean prakriti disappears. So Sankhyains are not willing to admit the unreality of prakriti. They'll say prakriti is real still. Prakriti, by the way, just means the sum total of all experience. It's real still, but for others, not for you anymore, because you're in samadhi. But you know, Sankhya offers one more thing, which I think is really beautiful, which the Shaivas will adopt wholeheartedly. And this is the view that we're moving towards. Sankhya arguably provides a model for aesthetic joy, a model where the ultimate nature of freedom and happiness is not conceived of as an escape from this world, but as a recognition of what this world really is. So this is a reframe on the idea of moksha. Mostly the word moksha, if I may be so bold, is used as a stand-in for a kind of attempt at suicide. You know, meaning I want to not be this body, I want to not be this mind, I want to not experience the world. Because Indians are too smart for regular suicide. These days, not so much. But like back then, because we knew Buddhism and we knew Advaita Vedanta, like regular suicide, oh my God, don't even try it. It's like, you know why don't try it? Not because you'll go to hell and it's a bad idea, because it won't work, Baba. It's not intelligent. Because you'll just get a new body and a much worse body because, you know, the last memory you'll have is of one of terror and violence. And so that's just gonna, like, just don't do it. It's not a good move. But you're right. Right? Like Buddhists and Advaita Vedantins are probably like, no, you're right. You who have suicidal ideation, oh my God, you're the most liberated amongst us because you understand there's no real happiness to be had here. Like you understand that this is fucked. You took a look around, tried some drugs, had some sex, maybe even made a lot of money, and you looked around, you're like, this is fucked. I'm gonna kill myself. Good. That's a good realization. But you know that you can't do it in the regular way. So you need to do it in this way. You need to attain samadhi. You need to attain something that will permanently off you, right? Like that will permanently blink out your star. So that's one view of moksha. Like moksha is the end of all wanting because moksha is the end of all being as we know it. It is the beginning of maybe a new being, but that being, bear in mind, in yoga, in Advaita Vedanta, is described as not even an experiencing subject. It has no experience. No experience is possible for that being, right? So generally we push back on moksha. And this is not unique to the Shaiva Tantric traditions. Bhakti traditions also push back on moksha, right? They say, why would I want to become sugar when I can taste sugar? That's language that we get in Ram Prasad's Tantric flavored Kali Bhakti poems. So the idea that I want to continue being and experiencing subject. Yes, and not only is it merging with the absolute. Think of a moth diving into the flame. It becomes the flame, but it ceases to be the moth. Now that would be fine if the flame was a subjective experiencer, because then you could argue that it's a fuller experience to be the flame than it is to be a moth. And that's why it's desirous for the moth to be subsumed in the flame, because then it has a fuller experience. But what if I told you the flame was just the end of the moth and you're a moth? Then what are you going to do? Jump into the flame? I mean, yes, you will, arguably, because the flame is so beautiful, but it's suicidal. Like, don't do that, because you'll die. And for what? That's it. And for what? That's the claim. So if moksha is no longer feeling the body, no longer feeling the mind, no longer experiencing the world, if moksha is merging with the absolute, insofar as the absolute is actionless, experienceless, then why would I want that? And you could say, well, I want that because of the suffering of this world. The world is so bad that I need to get out. And fine, if that's your solution to the problem of the world, then do that. And last week we were making some somewhat snarky comments about this. We were talking about the bone and the, what do you call it, the ants on the bone and the cracks on the bone. I don't need to revisit all of those metaphors. But Sankhya, even before, I mean, Sankhya is an ancient school of philosophy, you know? But even before yoga, before Advaita Vedanta, before all these Shaiva, Shakta, Tantric ideas, even then, Sankhya had this sense for the aesthetic rapture of being free even while embodied. So I would argue that there is a Jivan Mukti idea embedded in this Sankhyan duality. So I am Purusha, pure spirit, and Prakriti is the sum total of all experience. The problem is that I don't know that I'm Purusha. Once I know that I'm Purusha, then I can finally start to enjoy Prakriti. So the problem is not Prakriti. The problem is that I don't understand that I'm Purusha. Once I understand that I'm Purusha, I don't have to get rid of Prakriti because now Prakriti can finally be enjoyed. So the goal here is to go from suffering to happiness, actually, to fulfillment, to joy, meaning to some kind of experience which is more satisfying than the experience I'm having now. So you get a kind of art theory from this or an aesthetic theory from this, and this explains why Abhinavagupta, one of the greatest tantric masters, was also such a great aesthete. You know, in some Sanskrit circles, some students of classical language in the West and in India, they only know Abhinava in this capacity, you know. They're probably not familiar with his Tantra Loka or his Tantra Sara. They might have only ever really read his Bharati, which is his commentary on the Natya Shastra. But he was a great, great aesthete. In other words, his aesthetic philosophy was so developed and his spiritual philosophy is necessarily equally developed because the two are not different. Our theories of poetry, of art, of beauty are intimately linked with our theories of truth and freedom and peace. And I think that's why John Keats captures it so beautifully. A thing of beauty is a joy forever. So Ananda and beauty, there's some link there between beauty and fulfillment and meaning. But I think that's in Ode to Aggression Earned. But in another place, he says, truth is beauty and beauty is truth. It's a profound statement because we often think of them as separate. We think of art as art and science as science. Science is all about truth and art is all about beauty. But you could say in religion, in spirituality, we conceive of them both as being one and the same thing. But it's the emphasis on beauty, I think, that you get in Sankhya, the emphasis on experience. So here, it's important that Prakriti is a feminine noun. Although Sankhya doesn't actually ascribe any beingness to Prakriti beyond its metaphysical, ontological status as like an infinite substance, it's a kind of woman to Shaivas, you know, a woman, because the word Prakriti is a gendered noun. But again, Sankhya won't say this. Just be very clear. Sankhya does not think that Prakriti is Shakti. They won't use that language. They don't have that language. In Sankhya, Prakriti is just matter, and it's inert in the way that we think matter is inert in like scientific materialism. Yeah. Wow, that's beautiful. Is that Keats? No, that's you. So, same thing, same difference. Now, let's take this idea of Prakriti being inert. That's wonderful still, though, because now, even though she's inert, you can't deny that she's beautiful. She's the magical display of phenomena, the myriad expression of nature. Now, who can enjoy that? The person who recognizes that he's Purusha. So, if you take Sankhya duality, without involving classical Vedantic or Buddhist idealism, you get this beautiful thing where Purusha's purpose is to look and Prakriti's purpose is to be looked at. How beautiful, right? Oh, Emily Dickinson. I'm a big fan of Emily's use of like capital letters. How wonderful. You can bring so much reverence into a word just by capitalizing it. Capitalize the D in day in the middle of a sentence and you're like, fuck the day. Anyway, Emily Dickinson, the original goth baddie. But now let's get back to this idea that um it's Purusha who looks and it's Prakriti who is seen. And so the two of them need each other, as it were. And so even in Sankhya, you get this beautiful metaphor actually in some of the texts of a blind woman and a lame man. So Prakriti is all energy but cannot see, arguably. And Purusha can see but has no energy, has no movement. So together they make a good team. The man who can see will guide and the blind woman will move. It's a very interesting thing, but the idea of like synergy or teamwork or some relationship, like that's implied, I think, in the Sankhyan worldview. And now you can see how we Shaivas are going to go to town with that, right? We're going to adopt the Sankhyan worldview, we're going to adopt yoga, but we're going to emphasize the aesthetic bliss of being Shiva, experiencing the fullness of Shakti, but then we're going to say the two are one. So we're going to derive an Advaita of Shiva and Shakti using the Sankhyan basic foundational idea of Purusha and Prakriti. How beautiful. So this is, I think, a grounding thing to notice that like Purusha is the witness and Prakriti is the witness. And I am Purusha actually, I just don't know it. But when I know it, do I turn off the movie? No, I enjoy it as a movie. That's a really important point. So here the world is no longer devalued. It's no longer seen as a problem. And by problem, we mean illusion. We mean void. We mean impermanent thing of suffering. It's not something to be escaped. It's not something to be dissolved. It's something to be recognized for what it is, and then something to be ultimately embraced, enjoyed, um, savored. So now we get this very developed theory of rasa, tastes, and all the different Bhairavas are like embodying what it's like to be free while tasting those tastes. So you could be an angry Bhairava, like Durvasas, and you could still be a Bhairava. You could be anything. You could experience the totality of Prakriti in its worst form and still be free. Because freedom is not defined here as the freedom of experience, it's defined as the freedom in experience. Isn't that a good one-liner? It's like it's not about being free of the world, it's about being free as the world. Write that shit down. That was good. No, I'm kidding, I'm kidding, I'm kidding. I feel like that's like a little tweet, TLDR, sutra of this. It's like it's many traditions, many spiritual traditions are about freedom from the world, right? This is a spiritual tradition about freedom as the world. But it's still about freedom. It's still about moksha. I'm kidding, you guys. I'm just joking. I'm playing with you. You know what my fear is? I make a lot of self-aware, what I think are funny jokes about cults. I'm like, haha, cult behavior. I'm just joking, but I'm so afraid that there are like going to be people who like don't know that I'm joking. Like, let me just give you a disclaimer for everything you will hear me say. Don't take any of it seriously. Here's my disclaimer. I'm just saying whatever, and take it seriously at your own peril. Like, just relax. You're free already. You're Bhairava. But anyway, so where are we? So the idea of freedom as the world, not freedom from the world, or freedom as the self, not freedom from the self, that, you guys, makes a world of difference, right? Like right there and then will decide what kind of spiritual path you're on. And that will change the kinds of practices that you do. It will change maybe even the things that you consume or the kinds of clothes that you wear, or the people that you hang out with, the way that you spend your time. Like everything changes based on our understanding of the goal. The means, the path will change based on our understanding of the ends. It's a remarkable thought. Anyway, Rudra Priyama, I'm so happy to see you. Just taking a moment's break from that stream of conceptual thought to see Rudra Priya. I saw that on your screen. It was Rudra Priya plus Kuleshwari plus Dharmakaya Devi, but now it's just Rudra Priya. Have we reconciled the three into one? What happened to those other two? Kaya Devi is there, but like, are they all with you or what? Oh, now I've lost even Ruth. Wait, sorry, you froze.
My audio cut out. Wait, it's not. Okay, now it's working. Did you hear what I said?
No, I
And then
missed it. I missed it. Say it again.
it's probably best I don't say
Ma censored you.
it.
And like, say it again for me, because I love the way it feels when you are telling me that I. Okay, now, like, what I missed what you said. But was there Kuleshwari and Kaya with you? Because that's what you're.
Not tonight. Yeah, last.
It saved your time
Remember we've
from
been
last
laying it
time.
down. Yeah.
Okay, okay. I was excited. I was looking at your screen. I was excited to see all three of you together. And then I saw the name and it's, alas, false advertising. Oh my God, this is Maya. It's impermanent. It's no longer valuable. I suffered once, therefore I need samadhi and never to like that, right? Like that's what happens in some traditions where we have one experience where it's like, oh, I was looking for X, but I got Y. And then we're like, oh, it's all Maya, but it's not. I mean, anyway. Did you see Maharaj? Did you see Gurudeva today? Oh
Yes.
my God. Who all went? I know Janaki Ma was there, right?
Cyan, Janaki, um, the Haley, who I don't think you've met. She lives in Fort Collins,
Haley
and
has been here since like 2020. She's like an OG. I know Haley. We've been like,
I think she said this Haley was found you like in January or like,
oh, the new Haley. Okay, sorry. Whoops.
and then oh my God, I can't remember it now because I'm all nervous.
Don't
Because
be nervous. But you saw him. How was that?
it was so he's so funny, and I got to ask him questions, and yes, it was lovely. Yeah, I while I was sitting there, like we got there and like sat down, and I wasn't even doing anything like spiritual or anything, but just sitting there, and I just like suddenly realized that like my heart felt so warm, like in his presence, like um. Yeah, it was wonderful. Very cool experience for sure. And I got to ask him some questions and stuff. Yeah.
I'm so happy. So excited for you guys. No, because like if you have felt any spirituality at all from this boy, it is but a faint, sad echo of my Gurudeva. I'm like, it's like I feel like a spark from his bonfire, like a shadow that clings to the light, the blazing light that is our Guru, the bliss of all the gods and goddesses. You'll see that in Kaula Marga, we really revere the Guru because the human form, the body of the Guru is our highest ideal. And so I'm just so happy that you saw him. My all in all, my everything.
Thanks for telling us like about him coming. He actually spoke tonight of like the guru relationship and everything, and just about God and like practice. Yeah, that was the topic.
Yes, John, how lucky, how wonderful. I'm taking pranams through you all. Anyway, yeah, cool. So Kuleshwari is at home, hopefully. I texted her earlier, but Kaya did.
Yes, I at home, yeah. Mhm.
Good, good. So anyway, hi, I'm happy you're all here. But the idea of this world as freedom rather than freedom from the world is key. It changes everything about how we approach spiritual life. So now let's see how we would redefine spirituality in light of this new thought that the world is not a problem. It's my lack of understanding about how to enjoy the world that is a problem. So coming back to that idea of the gunas, which we started off with about an hour ago. So we have these three gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas. And the world, the problem which we have with the world is that it's mostly sattva, it's mostly rajas and tamas. Like most of what we experience in the world is agitation, is greed, is lust, is anger. It's kind of stressful and disturbing and also really depressing. There's so much about the world that hurts us. Maybe we're lonely, maybe we long for a human connection, but we can't connect with anybody. We just don't know how to talk to them, or we feel a sense of rejection because we don't know how to make our needs and wants known in the world, and so we feel like we're being ignored by those who love us, and maybe we don't even feel like there's anyone who loves us. Or we feel bored, like we're not happy with our work and we don't feel like we're contributing meaningfully to the world, etc., etc. You name it. There's so many ways to suffer here. And everyone has their own brand, their own personal brand of samsara caused by their own psychological projections. So for some people, it's loneliness. For other people, it's boredom. Whatever it is, tamas, the tamasic experience, and rajas, the rajasic experience, these seem to predominate in samsara. And like we don't even know that we're in samsara until arguably we get a taste of sattva. So sattva comes when we're in the presence of a guru. It comes when we read a spiritual book. It comes when we're out in nature. Sometimes we just get this sense that there's more to life than what meets the eye. So sattva is important because the glimpse of sattva is what sets us on the path. And it makes sense then that the path for most of us is going to look like this, increasing the quotient of sattva, which might mean a change in how you spend your time, who you spend your time with, what kind of diet you consume, what kind of food, what kind of diet means both food and media, what kind of music you listen to, what kind of shows you watch, and of course, what you do in spiritual practice, like what kind of meditations you do, what kind of rituals you do, what kind of substances do you offer, all of that is really an attempt, like I was saying in the beginning, to increase the quotient of sattva. And as sattva increases more and more and more, naturally one becomes lighter. One feels cheerful. You know, we could say cheerfulness is one of the first signs of spirituality because arguably you could say, from a Sankhyan guna point of view, that's what happens when you do spiritual practice. You get more sattva. And what is sattva but joy, luminosity, lightness? So, if you conceive of spirituality as the cultivation of sattva, then yes, we should be very careful about what we eat and we should stay away from tamasic and rajasic people, media, foods, etc. And we should do our best to stick to those things that increase the quotient of sattva. And that might be different for all of us. Now, Sri Ramakrishna would describe all three of them, interestingly, as robbers. Because you have to remember that sattva does not exist on the side of Purusha in the Sankhyan system. It exists on the side of Prakriti. So in Prakriti, there are these three gunas. What is Prakriti but the play of the gunas? And Sattva guna is that thing in Prakriti which helps you recognize yourself as Purusha. But it's still part of Prakriti. So even in Advaita Vedanta, even in Buddhism, you would see, classical Buddhism, you would see it as unreal because it's still part of it's impermanent, it's a state, it's a mental state, albeit a very helpful and conducive mental state to recognize your real nature beyond all mind. You know, so we want sattva as a means to an end, not as an end, but for many of us it's an end, and that's where we get trapped. So it becomes the golden chain, you know, we're addicted to sattva because we're addicted to the state of mind that sattva engenders. Lightness, luminosity. That's why people become severely anorexic sometimes when they start practicing spirituality because they're afraid to lose that sense of physical lightness. So they're scared to eat anything. Or they become severely antisocial or anxious. People become severely anxious when they start spiritual practices because they don't want to lose their state of sattva by interacting with some substance or some person or some environment that is not sattvic enough for them. So it's interesting. They become anemic shadows of the people that they used to be. They're no longer able to eat anything, go anywhere, can't hang out with anybody, and they're scared of everything. You know, a person who is addicted to sattva is terrified of the world because the world is full of rajas and tamas. So often they become recluse. They just like hide in their house, or they never eat, or never go out, or never talk to anybody, and they drift away from their families and they drift away from their friends. And honestly, in many cases, they drift away from themselves. Tragically, they dissociate, as it were, from the parts of themselves that they consider not pure enough. And that's a very sad thing to see a person fear so much in the world. And it's tragic because spiritual life was supposed to ideally increase the quotient of joy. One should become joyful in the world. One should become, what do you call it? Able to engage with others in a meaningful way. But instead, one becomes afraid, and that's the trap of sattva, because it's still a kind of mental state. When you start to cling to it, tamas, that's the tamasic influence of sattva, because once you try to cling to a mental state, it's greed. Now you're greedy to maintain a particular state of the mind. And out of that greed comes a Puritanism. So much of the experience, arguably in Hinduism, in Christianity, is a kind of Puritanism, if we're going to be frank. And it's really powerful. That Puritanism is really powerful when it comes from an actual experience of sattva. You know, because if you actually experience it, a lot of people, by the way, their Puritanism doesn't come from experience, it comes from wanting to fit in. So when they find themselves members of a church that is very puritanical, um, they just adopt that Puritanism because they want to belong to that church. But it's not real. It's not like really, really, really coming from a true place. And these are the same people who, although they'll go out and judge everyone and act really puritanical, they will indulge in all those things that they have a problem with from their puritanical point of view. But there are some people, and these people are maybe the most intolerable. You know, these are the, what do you call it? Like born again type. One second. But these like born again types, these are the ones that are dangerous because their Puritanism is not coming from a desire to fit in. It could also be coming from that. It's not necessarily coming from just adopting some dogma from some church. It's coming from the fact that they experienced something. And that experience was so much better than what they had anywhere else. So now they're born again. And now they're deathly afraid of anything in the world that would be a poison for them, given that they want to maintain that experience, that state. So they're afraid of certain foods, certain people, and then they start bashing those things, those foods, those people, and whatnot. And so another dark side of sattva, I guess you could say, is pride. You know, you could argue like the first problem with sattva is its greed. Sattva creates a lot of greed, greed for a repeat experience, greed to hold on to that experience of lightness and luminosity. But also, when that experience is had, even if it's only remembered, even if it's merely a reminiscence, it makes one feel spiritually superior. Like I'm more spiritual because I'm pure. I mean, that's kind of the danger of that word sattva, is it's often linked to our Christian notions maybe of purity. The sake of like for the sake of sattva, we have to avoid certain foods. So the foods that help us feel sattvic are pure foods. So often we mean like light vegetarian foods. And the foods that make us feel heavy or agitated, rajasic, tamasic foods, are impure foods. The activities, the people, the food, the media that makes us feel anything but peaceful, that's a problem. And that's the devil. And we should push it away. And we should scorn people who engage in those things. That's Puritanism, and it's rampant in the Vedic context, in the Brahmanical context. And so there are many traditions, of course, that are more Brahmanical in that they're more interested in cultivating sattva, cultivating purity, and they're right to do so because that's part of spiritual life. Like, unless you cultivate sattva, how will you reflect back to yourself what you truly are? But now, look at Sri Ramakrishna's claim about these three things. They're all still, all three of them, robbers because they're all still in the realm of prakriti, they're still in the realm of mind. So Sri Ramakrishna would say it's like you're going in the middle of the woods, and then one day, while you're going in the middle of the woods, three robbers catch hold of you. One is the tamasic robber, the other is the rajasic robber, and the third is the sattvic robber. It's one of the most beautiful metaphors actually on these three gunas. So the tamasic robber wants to kill you then and there. He's like, let's just kill this guy and take all this stuff. Rajas is a little bit better. The Rajasic guy is like, no, no, let's not kill him. I mean, then we'll get into so much more trouble. Let's just tie him to a tree and leave him for dead. So both of those are obviously undesirable outcomes. To be killed then and there by the inertia of tamas, or to be tied up, bound by your desires to the tree until sooner or later you die by the influence of rajas. Both of those are not desirable outcomes. So the third thing is the sattvic thief. So he ties you up. But then, after the other two walk away, he comes back. He feels some compassion for you. So a sattvic person feels a lot of empathy, a lot of compassion, etc. So he comes back and he unties the rope and he says, "Okay, brother, look, we stole all your stuff. There's no need to kill you. Let me show you the way out of the forest. I know you're lost and scared, and you must really want to get home. So come with me." So the sattvic guy takes your hand and leads you to the edge of the forest, and he points out the way and he points out your true home, or I guess you could say your true home. He's like, "Over there. That's where your wife and children are. That's where your family is. Go there." And you're full of joy. You're like so grateful. You're like just so thankful. You're like, "Why don't you come with me? Come back home with me. I'll give you a meal. I want to introduce you to my wife and friends and just like tell them how great you are." And the sattvic thief is like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa. Let's not get ahead of ourselves here. At the end of the day, I'm still a thief though, right? I'm still a robber. And if I go back into that village, I'm gonna get caught. Like I'm gonna get put in jail because I am the sattvic thief. And just because I'm a sattvic thief doesn't stop me from being a thief. And that's a very important point. So these three guys, the rajasic thief, the tamasic thief, and the sattvic thief, they're all still three thieves. Although notice the sattvic thief is special. He's privileged because he's able to take you out of the forest, but he can't follow you there. I'm thinking almost of Virgil in Dante's Inferno. So Dante is in hell, but at least he has Virgil who can lead him out of hell. But look, Virgil can't follow him into purgatory, and nor can Virgil follow him into heaven. Isn't that noteworthy? Like Virgil, the poet guide of Dante, is only good up till you get out of hell. He can't cross that realm because he's a spirit of that realm also. Although a helpful spirit, as opposed to the other spirits who just want to torture him, right? So now, this is very important to point out that sattva is still a robber. And this is why. Because if you cling to sattva, you're still trapped in the mind. And this is one of the most refined prisons you could develop for yourself. The prison of pride and pretense. So if anything, our entire spiritual tradition is designed to break the walls of our prisons of pride and pretense. Because so much of spirituality is just that. It's just hypocrisy. It's just new clothes, a new name, a new language, and a new sense of superiority. I'm better than everyone because I'm vegetarian. So we eat meat because we don't want to feel that. And again, this can backfire on you because then you can feel better than everyone for not be, like obviously this is a very convoluted kind of thing and it could be an ad infinitum sort of thing. And so there's a lot of pride also in impurity, but the goal is to go beyond both. And so in the Shaiva tradition, look at the Kapalika saint. I mean, we talked about this last week, but think of our epitome of spirituality. The Kapalika saint is someone who lives in the Smaśāna, perennially drunk, drinking liquor from a skull bowl, surrounded by funeral pyres, dogs, and jackals and whatnot, worshipping the goddesses of that place. The cremation ground is a tamasic place. Like I said, it's where people go to cry and feel grief. There's a heaviness there. The kapala, the funeral pyres, all of these are impure substances. And look, the kapalika is besmeared, bedecked in them. He wears the ashes of the dead. He wears the garments of the dead. He sits in the place of the dead. He drinks out of the skull of the dead. And what he drinks is pure transgression. And this is the Shaiva ideal, the idea of the sage, the saint, the Kapalika saint, which is an inversion, as it were, of the ideal as we find it in the more Brahmanical, purity-oriented traditions. So, arguably, developing a lot of sattva first will really help you with this. So you could argue that a lot of these sadhanas are sadhanas designed to go beyond sattva, but that doesn't mean that sattva is really helpful. Now, Sri Ramakrishna would talk about these three gunas as all of them being equally conducive to spiritual life. It just is a matter of temperament. So he described what I love as a form of bhakti. He calls it the tamasic bhakti. So there are many people who would say like bhakti is just sattva. You can only love God if you're sattvic, because for many people, spirituality and sattva, they're synonyms. This is what I hope to show in the first part of the talk, that when most people think of spirituality, what they have in mind is the cultivation of sattva, which is a sense of dissociation or disambiguation from the body and from the mind, or from the heavier, more embodied aspects of existence. So it means a kind of diet, a kind of lifestyle that creates a feeling of lightness and joy. That's what most of us mean when we use the word spirituality. But look, Sri Ramakrishna says, it's not just sattva that produces bhakti. In fact, bhakti can be conceived of in its tamasic form also. And does anybody want to take a guess at this? Many of you already know, but what would tamasic bhakti look like? Already we know tamas is the energy of anger, greed, lust, heaviness. It's the darkest of human emotions. What would that look like if you applied it to God? Yeah, you know what? Yes, it would look like animal sacrifice, maybe. And it would look, yeah, Rajiv is right on the money. It would look like shouting at God, abusing God, cursing God. It would look like using your anger as a spiritual practice. So, yeah, it would look like sitting in the Smaśāna, which is a very tamasic place. It would look like using lust and anger, like being horny for God, desiring to fuck God, desiring to kill God, being angry at God. The reason it's bhakti, though, and this is important, is because it's all directed towards God. That's what makes it bhakti. These are all the darker emotions of the psyche, which are being reintegrated into your spiritual life, into your immediate day-to-day experience, but now used, as it were, as energy for sadhana. So we don't like sattva, arguably, for this reason. Because it creates pride, because it creates pretense, and because, this is so important, because it's weak. By weak, we mean anemic. And by anemic, we mean not full. It doesn't take into consideration the full picture. It's but one of the three gunas. And so if I am addicted to one of the three gunas, I am rejecting the other two. Notice I'm cutting myself off from so much power. So this is the claim that we make in the Kaula Marga. We don't want freedom, we want fullness. So that's another one-liner that you can write down, I think. It's not freedom that we want. If by freedom you mean clinging to sattva, or even if by freedom you mean going beyond sattva. Because even if you manage to go beyond sattva, ultimately what will you get but a state of perennial samadhi, which we argue is a veiled form of suicide? We don't want that. We don't want this nihilistic deletion of the self. We want a fuller experience. We want fullness. So purnoham, purnohangta, the ability to say I am full or I am fullness, purnohangta. This statement is the claim of Bhairava, and we want to be Bhairava. We want to attain that ultimate state of fullness and freedom. So this is so, so, so important. We are reframing what moksha looks like, what freedom looks like. We're reframing freedom to mean fullness. And that means our spiritual life will naturally be interested in using three as opposed to one modality. So while we think sattva is good, remember, this should not be a rejection of sattva. That's why I'm trying to spend a lot of time in this lecture arguing for why sattva is so good. It's luminosity, it's clarity, and arguably it's a vasishta who can really benefit from these types of sadhanas. One who has a lot of sattva, who is now ready to use the other two. Um, so the other two, of course, rajas and tamas, they inhere within us and they inhere in certain kinds of foods. So in our path, we offer those foods to God, because that's symbolizing the fact that we're offering the energies associated to those foods to God. And not only that, when one eats animal flesh, one gets physical strength also, which we want to use. Or when one engages in certain activities, one gets mental agitation, which we'd like to use. So all of these things can be really disturbing and really problematic unless it's channeled towards God. So what Sri Ramakrishna has in mind is very simple, actually. It's this idea of just attacking God like a dacoit, falling upon God like a highway robber, and demanding your inheritance. I want to realize you, Ma, and I will not live another day until I do. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill myself. I'm going to kill everything until I realize you. There's nothing I won't do to realize you. And so Sri Ramakrishna's tamasic bhakti, you could say, was at its height when he took the dagger, when he took the sword, the kadaga, the sacrificial blade, and was about to kill himself because of rage, because of his frustration, his inability to realize Kali, the ultimate animal sacrifice. Don't try to worship Kali without animal sacrifice. But the only animal you have to kill is yourself, arguably. And not in the way that these Vedantists are talking about either, or in the way that these Buddhists are talking about. Not that kind of suicide. And not in the way that all the depressed people are talking about either. That's a cheap form of ending a body only to inherit a new one. Hey, Ruth is in my favorite shirt. I put the hot in psychotic. I'm so impressed with this shirt. I'm like, oh my God, that's my mother. She puts the hot in psychotic. It's my ideal. Look at that shirt. Wait, let me show you. Hold on, I've spotlighted. I don't think we saw it. There it is. Yeah, I put the hot in psychotic. I know. Sat is saying, maybe don't put this on YouTube, you'll get banned. No, just today, someone reached out to me on Instagram and they're like, why do you swear so much? But notice a lot of times it's because of our idea of what spiritual people should be like. We think they should all be vegetarian and all really peaceful and love and light and just text you with grand rising. If a spiritual person is like, no sleep till Brooklyn, motherfuckers, then you're like, wait, what? If somebody's like, let's get riggedy wrecked, you're like, wait, whoa. I thought we finished with that 20 years ago when we were in college. I thought now we're also sattvic. Now we don't drink and don't do drugs. Now we don't like, now we're just better than everyone, right? Isn't that what we're doing? We're helping each other affirm that we're better than everyone. Anyway, so you could say like you don't need to do panchamakaras or bali or anything like that, but the attitude of like being horny for God or being proud to be God's child or like cursing God or attacking God, that's called tamasic bhakti, and you could argue that Sri Ramakrishna did that. Like his bhakti, when we read his life in the Lila Prasanga and other sources, was a kind of tamasic bhakti. He fell upon God with fire and fury. And there was no practice that he wasn't willing to try. And so he fell upon God the way a highway robber would fall upon a victim. He took God by storm, by force. That kind of energy. And when you saw Swami Vivekananda smoking his cigarettes and eating his bacon, when he came to America, oh my God, what a powerful force. People had a big problem with his smoking. They were like, oh my God, is he addicted to cigarettes? Even Girish Chandra Ghosh called him out for it. He's like, you're addicted to cigarettes. It's a very funny thing. But I mean, can you imagine this person who's like almost chain smoking, who is just eating meat, and now who is giving the best lecture you've ever heard on Advaita Vedanta? It's like it doesn't track because, especially not now, because there's this consumer capitalist kind of idea of what a spiritual person should look like, and they'll put that garb on in order to sell you retreats and stuff. Yeah, Girish Ghosh, the alcoholic, one of Sri Ramakrishna's greatest saints, is scolding Vivekananda, I think in jest, they were very good friends, for being addicted to cigarettes. He was addicted to cigarettes, and ultimately it killed him. So both Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda both enjoyed a good smoke, though Sri Ramakrishna got throat cancer and Vivekananda had asthma and died probably of respiratory issues. So but the point is, they don't match our descriptions in our head of what a spiritual person should look like. Vivekananda once grabbed a guy by the scruff of his neck on a boat and threatened to throw him off the boat. Do you know that story? He said, if you abuse my religion once more, I will throw you off this boat. He grabbed a missionary by his neck. Vivekananda he had anger. There was strong kind of ferocity. He was Krodha Bhairava or Chanda Bhairava from time to time. And he was also really silly and playful. If you met the real Vivekananda, chances are many people might not have understood the depth of his spirituality because maybe he would not have met our own kind of skewed notion of what spirituality looks like. So going back to that lecture I was making, the point I was making in that lecture a few weeks ago, it's like, yeah, maybe what you want is freedom, but when you really get it, you might crave fullness. Because maybe what you want is to be Bhairava. And that's the point we made 2 lectures ago, and that's what we want. We want fullness, Purnohangta, Purnata, or something. So coming back to this idea that Sri Ramakrishna did practice a tamasic bhakti. He fell upon God with fire and fury and force. But there's another idea here that certain deities are also associated to certain gunas. So Saumya deities we say are more sattvic, whereas the Ghora deities like Kali and Bhairava and others, they're more rajasic and definitely more tamasic because their dhyana mantras, as we just discovered, place them in tamasic settings, like in cremation grounds, right? And here's the question, right? Like Shambhunatha is asking a really, really deep question, and it doesn't seem like in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna or anywhere else, really, for that matter, is there a clear answer? How do I turn my lust towards God? How do I turn my anger towards God? We know that Sri Ramakrishna says time and time again, turn your lust towards God, turn your anger towards God. But what actually is the mechanism there? Are we just fantasizing about God? Are we just feeling angry and then using language that like directs our anger towards God? Like, what does that actually look like? I'm just gonna go out on a limb and say it looks like worshipping Kali, you guys, or Bhairava. It looks like practicing the Kaula Marga. It looks like the kinds of pujas that we're prescribing. It looks like the kinds of philosophies that we're teaching. There might not be a single practice, as per Shambhunatha's question. It might just be this whole sadhana, this whole orientation, right? Which has its roots in finally getting over the fact that some things are pure and some things are impure. It has its roots in accepting the whole picture. Sattva is great. Mind you, if you just turn around and have a problem with sattva, that's the same problem in a much worse way, right? Like, no. We love sattva. We love sattva in this house, right? Like that's important. We should cultivate sattva. We should sit daily for meditation. But we also do a lot of shit, arguably, that increases rajas and tamas. The deities that we worship have a tamasic exterior because they live in the cremation ground. So that being said, the first step, as per Shambhunatha's question, how do I actually practice this thing of tamasic bhakti or turning my anger towards God? Or like, how do I actually walk the Kaula Marga? You could argue that like the first thing is to get over this idea that there is something called pure, something called impure, to be willing to just offer everything to God. And that's why, in a Brahmanical context, in which meat, fish, drugs, wine, and sex, in which all of those things are forbidden, and even sex is not forbidden, it's just seen as secular. But in the context in which those things are scorned, it makes sense to offer them. Do you see? But they're a symbol. I mean, they're powerful. There's a magical significance to these substances too. But psychologically speaking, metaphorically speaking, they symbolize those things that we don't feel are adequate offerings for God. In other words, they symbolize those things that we don't accept in ourselves, hang-ups that we have with ourselves and with nature. If you could just love yourself completely, that would be what it is to love Ma completely, to love her in all her forms. When we depict her as Kali, we're saying, hey mind, here is an image of God that you will detest. Now fall in love with it. Like look at yourself. There's so much about you that you detest and you don't want to look at. This sadhana, hopefully every day when you think of Kali, when you chant her mantras, when you engage in her pujas, slowly, 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 that ice will thaw. And you'll find, like, every day you look at a crazy woman drunk in a cremation ground, covered in blood and semen and whatnot, and ash. And every day you realize this is God. So maybe you're willing to look at your own soiled garment covered in blood and semen and ash. Maybe you're willing to look at your own cremation ground and you're like, oh my God, Mother dances here too. And that's love. The love that we have for every aspect of our psyche, that inclusiveness, that's what converts demons. Not the violence, aggression. Like we want to convert the demons of our mind the way Christian missionaries want to convert Christians in like the early eras. Like they come with fire and sword. They show up, they colonize the place, they put everyone in camps and they destroy their idols and force them to be Christian because of their idea of purity and the right path, etc. They have an idea of what's right and what's wrong, and they're willing to enforce that with the sword. And that's what we do to ourselves. The reason why we have such a problem with Christians, I have no problem with Christians or the Crusades or the colonies. Do you know why? Because I don't do that to myself. But we do. We like look at ourselves and we have a problem and we try to convert the demons with fire and with. So when we look at what the Christians are doing, we're like, oh my God, that's so terrible. It's terrible because we recognize ourselves in it. If we have judgment for anybody, it's only really judgment for ourselves. What we see in others is only there in us. So most of us are 24/7 engaged in the process of routing out all these demons, putting them in camps, destroying their gods, and trying to convert them to our idea of what's right. In other words, we're trying to get all the Rajasic and Tamasic things to become Sattvic, and that means we're trying to reject, to push away, and to prefer, and to select for, which is what the Sykes-Picot Agreement does to Africa. It's unnatural. It's unnatural to divide a continent up in this way. It's unnatural to divide yourself up in this way. We live in a house divided. See, Americans will enjoy that. Now, the problem is that we have judgments, and Kali is here to free you from them. So when you do the sadhana, when you daily offer the panchamakas, when you do whatever the sadhana looks like, of course, follow what your guru told you. But when you do the sadhana for Mother Kali, ideally, you like look upon her the way that she's described. And that's something that people don't even want to do. They put a sari on her. They don't want to look at her nakedness, her arousal. They want to like censor Kali. Her sexuality is too much for them. They don't like her violence. They say, oh, it's only the demons that she kills. When her dhyana mantras specify the Narashira, the human's head. Nobody wants to think about Kali in the cremation ground. Instead, they put her on a battlefield and say she's fighting for dharma. Then you cheat yourself out of the sadhana, as per Vivekananda's wonderful poem. I mean, it's still a good sadhana, but it's just no longer Kali, I think. And that's fine. It's another form of Devi. That could be what you need. But if you want Kali, arguably what you want is fullness. You want everything. And you want to recognize God and divinity in everything. So that means you have to love every part of yourself. That's kind of why sometimes there are really gross sadhanas that Sri Ramakrishna himself practiced, like touching your tongue to excrement. Be careful about that. I know someone who tried it and got horribly sick. Be careful. Like you need to have the guidance of a guru. But you know what? It's a powerful sadhana. I'll just tell you, once I licked a urinal, one of the most powerful experiences of my life, just inspired by a divine mood. And like that moment, and when I did my bali, my first bali, oh my God, as a lifelong, like 12 years, vegetarian, like sattvic, killing my first animal, like all of these things. By the way, when I started, the moment I speak openly about these things, and I often try not to, and nowadays I tend to because I've gone mad. But like when I speak, the moment I speak openly about this, just the other day, I put out a video and in it, I had just become a little inspired by your love and feeling safe in your presence. I became a bit candid about my experiences with Bali. Usually I don't like to talk about that stuff, but it's helped me a lot. And so I was talking about how it felt to do my first Bali. And then immediately I get a barrage of messages on Instagram from various people and they really have a problem with it. They're like, oh my God, I can't believe, like and they should actually. It's good that they do. It means they're pure and good. But I'm not pure and I'm not good. I'm evil. And I'm okay with that. But sometimes when I speak about that, notice it's challenging. Good, that's what Kali should do to you, right? Like when you see Kali or when you see the worshippers of Kali, you should be challenged because they're here to show you the parts of yourself that you don't want to see, your violence, your greed, your lust, your depression. And then to take all of that and say, Kali dances here too. Kali dances here too. So the sadhana is somewhat disequilibrating, especially for spiritual people. People, by that I mean people who are addicted to sattva or who have a very clear idea about what spirituality looks like. The whole purpose of Kali sadhana, the Kaula marga, is to wrench that concept loose. But it's painful. It's like if you have a tooth and it needs to come out, but it's not quite out, the sadhana will kind of wrench it a little bit, and it can be a lot. And then when it's pulled out finally, oh, the blood. But it's freedom. Then it's flow, then it's power, then it's freedom. But that freedom can be a very hard-won freedom because we don't really know where in our mind that we're sticking. It's different for all of us. We all have different sticking points, and you can trust her to find those. But then you have to trust her to also remove those baby teeth so that you can grow your fangs. That's the idea. So let her sharpen your fangs, but don't be afraid of the process, which can be very destabilizing and harrowing and challenging at times. So the sadhana should be done in a very systematic and structured way. And so that's why there's a lot of emphasis on the guru, there's emphasis on secrecy, there's emphasis on sequencing, etc., 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 just to like protect people in the sadhana, right? So to close out this talk and to open for a bit of Q&A, I'm just going to suggest a few things that can be really grounding in the practice of sadhana. And here, right, Gretchen, I hope if nothing else, Gretchen Ma, like the first thing to take away from this is like, oh my God, the woman that I worship is crazy. How divine must my craziness be? Thank God I'm a crazy motherfucker because like mother, like son. Or the woman that I worship is a sex worker. She is. Look at her. Her hair is wild and free like a sex worker's. And why not? And why not? And the woman that I worship is covered in blood and kills and is horny and like is drunk. Like, and why not? All of that, like the idea that like in this universe, everything is equally God. And the point is not freedom, but fullness. Yeah, I know it's true, Sataji. But the idea of licentiousness or freedom or whatever, it's like, look at her. She is everything that society scorns and rejects. And more importantly, she's everything you might have a problem with in yourself. And now they call it shadow work, I guess, in this tradition. Now to worship that, to do the sadhanas of that, it's a very, very important idea, right? Very, very crucial thing to do. And it's true of Bhairava sadhana too. It's the same thing. I don't think there's any difference. Kali is Bhairava, Bhairava is Kali. But let's come to the Bhairava idea. Bhairava means Bharita Tanuhu. Bharita means fullness. So Bharita Tanuhu iti Bhairava, he is that one who is full of the totality of experience. Meaning, the goal, again, I'll go back to this phrase again and again and again. The goal is not freedom, the goal is fullness. So to attain fullness, one does this sadhana to bring back into one's being, into divinity, that which previously maybe validly one rejected because it wasn't serving us. So now it's time to engage in that practice of finishing with all shame, with all fear, with all hatred, becoming fearless and joyful. So if you fear meat, the Bhairava sadhana will free you from that because you won't be scared of it. Doesn't mean you'll actually eat it. You'll just know that eating it doesn't harm your purity. If you fear sex or if you fear excrement or if you fear others, I think mostly our fear is not of substances but of people, then you won't fear them anymore. Because and that doesn't even mean that you will engage with them. It doesn't even mean that you will like eat excrement, and you should be careful about that. Doesn't even mean that you'll have a bunch of sex. It's just that you no longer feel like these things will meaningfully decrease nor even increase your spirituality because now you understand you are that reality in which the whole is contained. The fullness is contained. And the goal of our sadhana is to attain that fullness. And of course, there's so many refined sadhanas within the tradition, not just in terms of puja, but in terms of meditative techniques and visualizations. Vijnana Bhairava gives 112 of them. Some of them we practice while we're having sex. Some of them we practice while we're in states of great fear, getting a piercing, right? There are all these different sets and settings in which I can recognize I am Bhairava. Why should getting a piercing be any less of a setting to encounter God than doing a puja, right? That's the claim. So how do we stay safe though? Because I've sketched out the unique feature of Shaivism. Our idea of the saint is the Kapalika ascetic who carries around a skull bowl, drinking liquor. And by the way, in chapter 29 of the Tantra, Tantra Loka, I should be careful about saying this stuff because my audience is varied, and I'm conscious of the fact that these videos and these words and these podcasts do influence people. And I'm trying to be responsible with the kind of influence that we have on people, obviously. So ideally, the only kind of influence that would be desirable from all of this is to be influenced to like love God, to worship God in the way that you like best. But I also know that there are a lot of young people and a lot of people who are young, like in terms of their outlook, they'll just do what they're told, or they'll do what their heroes do. Please be careful. If you do as I do, you could get into trouble, you know? Um, and what I'm going to say next can get a lot of people into trouble because it's quote unquote in the Shastra. And so if you're addicted to purity, the first thing you will do is reject the Shastra. But if you are interested in worldliness, then the Shastra will be all too convenient for you. In the chapter known as 29 in Tantra Loka, which is the Kaula Yaga, there's a very clear imperative there. It says, Sada pibet, one should drink always. It's funny, it's like one should always be perennially drunk. And there are verses upon verses upon verses upon verses describing wine, draksha, as like liquid bhairava. And this is a very problematic thing for people to hear, especially people who have real issues with that stuff. And so we have to be careful with these kinds of things. That's why these texts are perhaps given in secret, right? Because sometimes people are like, oh my God, I wanted spirituality and I came to it, but actually what they needed was not this sadhana. What they needed is like ISKCON, like purity. That will help them more, I think. But some people, they're not yet like, grounded in sattva, and they're like, oh, finally I found the thing that the Shastras are like. And then, but even I don't have a problem with that. I think even that's part of somebody's journey, right? But anyway, having said that, there are texts that are like, yeah, no, like liquor is so important. The gods despise a person who worships without it. One should always be drinking liquor. Like these are the Shaiva Shakta texts that we find represented in the Kaula Marga or the Vamachar, which is really problematic, not just to Vaishnavas and to the Brahmanical context in general, but to the Shaiva tradition itself. We see in Tirumular's text, Tirumantiram, in Tantra number 1, in verses 360-ish, a clear rejection of these texts as not being authentic sources of Tantra. So the right-hand path, Dakshinachara or Shaiva Siddhanta, which is more Brahmanical in outlook, more purity-oriented, they outright reject those tantras as authoritative. Those tantras that prescribe these types of practices. But arguably, those people who engage in these practices are coming from that same setting, the same setting of Puritanism. And when they do engage in these practices, and again, it might not be their everyday practice, it might just be something they do once, they suddenly realize, oh my God, it doesn't harm my spiritual, nor does it help. And in some cases it does actually. But like they realize that like I am actually free and there's no substance or no person or no practice that could change that. And so look at me articulating my freedom in the midst of the orgy, in the midst of the battlefield. So I find the Bhagavad Gita an incredibly Kaula text. It's a text about Bali actually. Because think about this. Krishna is going to go and Arjuna is going to go and kill humans and God is telling him to do it. Hooray! What? I mean, like, all these, like, puritanical, like, soft, sweet, sattvic Hindus are reading this text written by warriors. A teaching from a warrior to another warrior. Maybe it's a caste thing. Maybe we're just Kshatriyas and this is our tradition and it's butting up against a Brahmanical idea of spirituality. I don't know. What could it be? But, like, there's a clear Kaula orientation in the Bhagavad Gita because it argues that anything, even the most reprehensible act of killing your guru, even that can be sadhana if it's done in the right spirit. So the whole thing comes down to that, the right spirit. Hence, walking the razor's edge. Nay, dancing with tigers or playing on this, dancing on the edge of a sword. Yeah, do you remember how people got so upset with that scene in Oppenheimer where Oppenheimer is quoting the Gita while he's in the middle of being ridden? He's having sex and he's quoting the Gita. I'm like, he gets the Gita. That's the Gita. The Gita is telling you that anywhere, anytime, think of God and that will be an offering to God, whatever it is that you're doing. But people got so offended. They're offended with Oppenheimer, the Oppenheimer movie, because the Gita was read aloud in a sexual context. But they're not offended by the Gita, in which God himself, God incarnate, tells his best friend to go and kill his guru. I mean, think about it. Anyway, coming back to the topic at hand, these sadhanas are extreme and also in some cases they can cause severe addiction problems. It's dangerous. It's dangerous for a lot of reasons. But you know what? My Guru Deva said it in the sweetest and most beautiful way. We were talking about some of these things one evening, and I was like, Marge, what is the real danger? I mean, I understand like how someone could maybe easily become an alcoholic because of these kinds of things, or like they could become kind of antisocial, or I could see how they would be cast out of society, or obviously I can see the potential for abuse in terms of power dynamics and in terms of cults and communities and all of that. We were just having this conversation together in terms of the Kaula Marga and in what context it could ever be safe and in what sense is it dangerous. And he said the most beautiful thing, the most nonchalant, sweet thing. He's like, you know what the danger is? He said, you waste time. I mean, isn't that beautiful to think that, like, really the worst thing that could happen, and for some people, this is really terrible because a human birth is very rare. But what if the worst thing, you guys, about all of this is you just went down the wrong road? Okay, all right. I thought this was gonna make me get spirit. I thought this was gonna help me in spiritual life. I thought it was gonna bring me closer to God, but actually it didn't. And now I've learned that. So good. Maybe that's the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario is you give the next 30 years of your life practicing something that doesn't actually bring you closer to God, that is really just indicative of your self-deception and your worldliness. So you found a way to disguise your worldliness as spirituality, and now you do that for 30 years and you have nothing to show for it. You're like, oh my God, fuck, they were right. I have to cling to sattva only. I have to reject rajas and tamas. Okay, cool. Bless your mistakes. There are angels unawares. But most people knocking it haven't tried it. And most people knocking it don't understand it. And so the purpose of this lecture, the purpose arguably, heck, of my being might just be to explain to some extent why we do this. Why Kaula Marga exists, why Vamachara exists. You think Ramakrishna came just for your Vedanta? You think he's here just for your Brahmanical Christian ideas of purity? If he is the Avatara, he came for all the paths. Who will speak on the Vamachara? Who will speak on the Kaula Marga? Aren't these paths too? And so there's this whole thing. It's like Sri Ramakrishna was scolding Swami Vivekananda for being critical of the Vamachara or the Kaula Marga, right? Um, and because Sri Ramakrishna, again, felt that all paths to God were valid, what's important is sincerity. It's about sincerity. It's not about what you do. It's about how you do it and the conviction and the meaning in which you do it. But then Swamiji had a big problem with the Kartabhajas and Gaudiya Vaishnava sects who were like having sex, I guess. Gaudiya Vaishnava sects who were having sex and drinking and doing orgiastic, like sentimental kind of things. And Swami Vivekananda was berating this group. And Sri Ramakrishna patiently listened for like an hour or two about all of this. And then he was like, don't find fault with them. That too is a way. So one day my guru was describing Ramakrishna and he got emotional and he said, this is Ramakrishna. After he made this point, he said, Ramakrishna listened to Swamiji for 2 hours calmly, like Krishna listened to Arjuna rant in the first chapter of the Gita. And then when he was done, when Swami Vivekananda finished his critique, Sri Ramakrishna calmly and sweetly said, that too is a way. Don't find fault for that. More or less, he said this. And then when my Guru Deva relayed this story, he like kind of paused and he said, and that's Ramakrishna. You know, and that's, I would argue, that's Kali. Total acceptance of everything. Even puritanical paths, those are also ways to God. It's about sincerity. In any case, he said this too is a path. And then he gave a very interesting metaphor. He said it's like it's trying to get into a house. That's what spiritual life is like. Now you can come in through the front doors, or you can come in through the back door. That's the scavenger's door. And now, of course, the connotation here is this is where some low caste, quote unquote, people would come in to clean up the feces in the house. So the scavenger's door is like associated with the muck and the gunk and the slime of the mind. You know, and so what Sri Ramakrishna is saying is that you, Swami Vivekananda, maybe don't need to come through that door. It's not a path for you. It's a path for scavengers. And so once this is interesting because in the tradition it's like, aha, see, that's Vamachara is bad. No, no, we took the wrong teaching from that claim. All paths are valid. They all lead to God. It's just that some paths are for scavengers. What if we're scavengers? Right? Like we have this idea that like, oh, we're all Swami Vivekananda. We don't need to go through that path because my God, we don't have any shit in the house that we need to clear out. We don't need to come in through the scavenger's door to like clear out the shit, you know? Because we're so sattvic, we're so pure, we're so free. That's the idea. It's like if anything Sri Ramakrishna was against, if he didn't like anything in the world, it was just hypocrisy. And maybe, if nothing else, this is just an attempt to say and do what you think, and not to think one thing and say and do something else in the name of spirituality, which most of us conflate with sattva only sort of mentalities, you know? So I think I've made the point quite clear, and I could go on and on and on, and I won't, so we can open for some Q&A. I really did mean to talk about non-duality a little bit, Advaita, and how Advaita will uniquely protect you from a lot of Kundalini crises. But I'm just gonna like briefly spell out a few things, okay, before I close the talk. So just a few things that we can take away from this. We know now that the Kaula Marga is difficult. It's difficult because it seeks to reintegrate those things that are maybe disturbing or difficult to reintegrate, like violence, like arousal, like lust, like greed, etc. Not only that, let me speak magically for a few moments. The deities that you're going to be worshipping, like Kali and Bhairava, if you worship them in their, in their forms, like Smaśāna forms, it can do something to you, like magically speaking, because you're going to be working with a lot of ghosts, a lot of spirits. Spirits also in terms of liquor, but spirits in terms of like spirits, you know. And if you go to the Smaśāna, there are spirits there. And not all of them play nice. They're motherfuckers, actually, some of them. They'll steal your stuff. Look, speaking magically, it's wild. It's a crazy place, the Smaśāna. And bringing that into your house, there's a good reason why Indians are superstitious about that. There's a good reason why there's a fear around Kali and even Nataraja, because they represent that, like I was saying 2 weeks or maybe last week, this Smashan Bhava, which takes you beyond reason. It can create a kind of instability, a fervor that many people might find off-putting, that you might be disturbed by. But not only that, the sadhanas are dramatic. Like I was saying, tantric sadhanas are really dramatic, and the practice of Kali and Bhairava are decidedly tantric. So the practices that you're going to be doing, like puja and whatnot, and of course the various meditations, they can be explosive and very, very powerful. So my claim here is that all Shakti sadhana, not just Kali sadhana, but especially Kali sadhana, but all Shakti sadhanas, including, I would even argue, Hatha yoga, will ideally arouse Kundalini Shakti. That's what's supposed to happen. Kundalini should awaken and should flow up the spine. So whether you're dealing with a single Kundalini structure or upper or lower Kundalini structure, if we use Kundalini to mean a kind of spiritual energy that is awakened through spiritual practice, then we should say this much, that intense spiritual practices using intense and explosive means might create an intense and sudden awakening, which for many people can be experienced as psychological crisis. Next week, I'm going to give you so many disclaimers as to how I'm not a licensed psychologist or psychiatrist, and I do not have the authority to speak about these things in a grounded academic or secular or scientific way. So next week, I'll give those disclaimers more because I'll talk about it more. But now I'll just give you the disclaimer and say this. From where we're sitting, from a spiritual point of view, putting aside all the very valid and very legit diagnosis and help that you can get from a more secular scientific environment, this is what we notice. The moment such a thing starts to happen, three things can come up that can totally fuck you up. Three things, and many things actually, but these three things mainly. The first thing is the sense that you are now better than everyone else. So a messianic complex. Sometimes when we have a huge surge of Kundalini, we get a huge surge of energy. We might not be sleeping, we might not want to eat anything. It's like we're really like, whoa. But then also we feel like Jesus Christ or like the prophet. And people treat us that way sometimes. And then you think, oh my God, I am the chosen one. Wake up, Neo. You're in the Matrix. You're the chosen one. And we're like, I'm Neo. Fuck, I'm the main character. Like that's I think one of the first thoughts that you're likely to get once Kundalini Shakti jumps up the spine, to use the language of this tradition, is that I am the shit, you guys. I am so great. I'm so special. I'm the avatar, I'm the prophet, and like this kind of language you'll find often in many communities, because look, these people have Kundalini Shakti. You can't deny that there's some level of awakening there. Otherwise, why the magnetism? Otherwise, why they have so many followers? Don't deny their power. They have power. It just got stuck somewhere. And it got stuck in this idea that I am the Lord and Savior of this world. Worship me. So therefore, the first thought that we're trying to circumvent with our sadhanas is this idea that we are anything. But it's very easy to get this idea if you follow the path of sattva, because then you look at all those people who are not sattvic, and it's much easier for you to then justify your Kundalini awakening and the messianic complex that comes about as a result of it. Because look, those people eat meat, they have sex. I don't. I'm pure. I'm a brahmachari, or I'm living a different kind of life than all of them. So one way to maybe combat that is to realize that there's nothing great about sattva and there's nothing terrible about rajas or tamas. Everyone is equally beautiful and pure and good. So the first thought, I am greater than everyone else, can be countered with this non-dual understanding that everything is equally ma, which we get through Kali sadhana. By recognizing that Kali dances everywhere, she dances there too, we realize like, oh, actually, no, I'm not uniquely, like, I don't uniquely realize God. Everyone, I mean, the heroin addict who's ODing in the back alley, they're having darshan of mind their own way, you know? That's also Ma. Or the person who is trying to make money on Wall Street, or the person who is commencing a genocide, whatever. Like you realize Ma dancers there too. That's what you'll get, honestly, as a result of Kali sadhana. Doesn't mean you won't actively oppose genocide or actively intervene to prevent your homies from dying from an OD. Like you might still do all of those things, but inwardly you have no judgment. You have no sense of this is bad and I am uniquely good. So the first idea that I am the Messiah, I am uniquely the chosen one, I am Avatar, I am Aang, like that should go away. But if it's there, it will make your Kundalini awakening pretty bad. It will just be, it's a sticking point for many of us. Secondly, the idea that other people need to be brought into the light. Obviously, this is related to the first, but it's rooted in the sense of the other. So if I think there are other people, I'm fucked. Because the moment I have a Kundalini awakening, I'm going to become evangelical as shit. I'm going to want everyone to feel the bliss that I feel, and I'm going to try to convert them. I'm going to try to like go out there and tell them about this bliss. I just won't let them enjoy the cake the way that they want. Do you know? The idea that they aren't realized and I am, those are related. When I think I'm uniquely realized, I also think that other people aren't. So I will go out there and with fire and fury try to convert them. But the third thing, and I think the most dangerous thing, which I'm going to speak to at length next week, the only real darkness in this world, the only real impurity, I would argue, is the idea of darkness or impurity. This is what Abhinavagupta defines mala as, agyana, ignorance. Ignorance about what? About Advaita. The truth is, folk, and I'll just say it, the truth is, folks, there is only God. There is nothing but God. All is love. So if you do a bunch of psychedelics, or if you have a Kundalini awakening, which sometimes can be at the same time or different moments, if somehow your mind tricks you into thinking there's a devil, you're fucked. You're fucked. Like if you think there's a bad guy out there, there's the Galactic Council of Good, and then there's the what is it? What do you call them? The Anunnaki or something? There's some Dark Lord Council of Evil Aliens or something. Oh my God, we're fucked. We're fucked. The idea that there's a devil, there's something evil, there's a force of darkness, a force of opposition. That's related to the second and first thing. I am the chosen one. There are other people. I have to bring them into the light because if I don't, they will end up in the dark. They'll get caught by 5G or some shit like that. Insert your favorite conspiracy theory. Now, here's the thing. Conspiracy theorists might not be wrong. I'm not saying that all conspiracy theories are wrong. I'm not saying any of them are right either. I'm just saying that conspiracy theorists sometimes have a lot of Shakti, and hence they have big followings because they have a lot of Kundalini Shakti. But bear in mind, a lot of those conspiracies come from that Shakti being misdirected or redirected as a result of dualistic thinking. So the idea that there is God and then there's the devil in the wake of a Kundalini Shakti that can really scare you, actually. You know, it can really be destabilizing. So what if all three of those were cleansed from the psyche? Like, what if you realize that the devil is also God? You know, some people call me a devil worshiper. Once someone came here and saw our puja, and they were like, "Oh my God, they're worshiping the devil in there." And of course, I enjoyed that. But I was like, yeah, no, I think they get it. They get the idea that like, yeah, I'm not interested in your sattvic god of good. Because your god of good is great, but it's just not full. I want fullness. I want the full picture. I don't want like some kind of cordoned off purity thing. So yeah, exactly. From darkness comes the light. And this idea of like, in this darkness, I see the light, and therefore I don't have a problem with darkness anymore. So when you worship Kali, you're worshiping the devil as God, you realize like it's Kali. Everything is Kali. And she's my mother. So the idea of like, are you a kitten or are you a mouse? If you're a kitten, how does the cat treat you? If you are a mouse, how does the cat treat you? So if you do Kali sadhana, you start to understand that you're a kitten. So when you're surrounded by ghosts, you're like, oh wait, I know these people. See, if I ever go to hell, everyone's always threatening me that I'm gonna go to hell on the internet, right? I'm like, look, you guys, if I go to hell, I'm gonna know everyone there. You know, like I would have invoked them at some point. And so just the other day I was helping my friend with a Vetala puja is. So we had to invoke a Vetala, a particular Vetala. So in a skull, in a human skull, covered in blood, like we did our puja in 3 a.m. with Bali, and we invoked the Vetala and whatnot for a particular purpose. Now, I was joking with my friend. I'm like, look, when I go to hell, when I go to hell, I'm gonna meet that guy, that Vetala that we summoned for that particular purpose. And I was like, hey, it's you. Do you remember that puja we did? I'm like, oh yeah, well, thank you for that meal. It was so great. Thank you. Like, it was a black rooster, just what I loved, like all of that, you know. So again, you get this feeling of like, I work with these spirits, I don't have to be afraid of them, including alcohol, including tobacco, including various things. Like, these are spirits with which I have a good relationship because they're part of my sadhana. And this is my divine mother Kali, who is the goddess of them all. So Shiva is Bhutanath, Bhutapati, he's the lord of ghosts. Why should I fear ghosts? when my Lord is Shiva. Sumeruji sent me an Ayurvedic exorcism texts, and there were specific ghosts, specific types of possessions, and specific cures. But at the very end, the last sutra, it said, and worship Shiva and you'll be good. Because whoever worships Shiva is free from all ghosts. So if you have ghost problems and shit, worship Shiva, worship Kali, you won't be scared of them. And if you're not scared of them, the picture changes. So think about how, like, say you're on a psychedelic trip or something, and some thought gets into your head that there's the devil. You feel such fear. And then you have a really bad experience, a bad trip. But then if you fix that thought and you realize, no, it's not the devil, it's just God appearing in this particular form, everything changes. The picture changes. The ability of reality to harm you is no longer there, because you can only really ever harm yourself with your own delusions. So removing the delusion that there are ghosts out to kill you is one of the things that you can attain through Kali sadhana. You realize that, like, oh wait, my mother is the mother of ghosts. Like, mother of dragons and mother of ghosts. She's my friend, and these ghosts are my friend. And you realize all my psychological hang-ups are my friend. If there is an Illuminati or some evil people out there sacrificing children in the Bohemian Grove, Kali permits it. You know how they're like, and your God permits it, and all these like conjuring style exorcism movies, something terrible happens, and the way that the devil gets you to like renounce your faith is by saying, and your God permits it. Well, if your faith is based on a God who is characterized as not being okay with it, and then it happens, then of course your faith is going to be destroyed. I'm just worshiping a different God, a God of fullness, a God of the jungles and of the coyotes and of the new moon. Now that's a deity that doesn't only permit it, but enjoys it. Doesn't mean I'm going to go out and kill people. It just means that I'm much less likely to. Look, it's the people, I would argue, it's the people who profess to worship a God of love who have done the most killing in the world. And we get the bad rep. We kill a goat every now and then, but we're the sweetest, mildest people you'll ever meet. Why? Because we just don't hate ourselves like the rest of you. You know, you're all so addicted to your purity, you're so shameful and guilt-ridden that you go out into the world and inflict your shame and guilt on everyone, and sooner or later, when they don't see it your way, you kill them. You colonize their country, take all their spices and gold, and call it religion. And that religion, you tell me, is based on a God that's just, a God that's pure. I will take my liquor. I will take my cigarettes. I will take my ghosts and my smashan, and I'll leave you to your society. Anyway, so maybe we'll leave it at that. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanam Astu. Jai Ma Kali. May this be an offering at her feet. Kali Arpanam Astu.